Hey folks, it's Cody Stoffer with Playmakers Corner, here to tell you about Code Red coaching. Competing in athletics means you've lifted the weights, you've watched film, and you've got the passion. Problem is, that's what everyone else in the state has done. Perfect your game by honing in on your mental performance with Code Red coaching. Whether you are a team or an individual, Code Red coaching has the tools to create mentally solid habits and set up you or your team for success. Find Code Red coaching at coderedcoaching.com or call 720-979-1914 to learn more today. That's coderedcoaching.com or 720-979-1914 today. Now back to the show.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? This is Felix Barons here with Playmakers Corner, and I'm here to give the recap of the first round of the 2024 1A Colorado High School Football Playoffs. We're going to just go through each matchup that happened this past weekend and just give a little quick recap based off some stats that were uploaded as of this recording date, November 12th, Tuesday morning. So let's get right into it, starting off with the number 1 and 16 seed matchup. Number 1 Ray took on number 16 North Fork, and they played their matchup in Eaton High School, and it was just a completely one-sided matchup for Ray as they were able to get the job done over North Fork, scoring 24 points in both the first and second quarter. This was just a dominating matchup. This was just a dominating performance from Ray as they completely took care of business against North Fork. Casey Midcap, the senior, led the charge, scoring most of the team's touchdowns, 5 for 6 for 128 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air, and also getting it done on the ground, having 6 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also saw a solid performance out of number 3 Samuel Meisner, the senior, who had 11 carries for 106 yards and a touchdown, and also getting it done on special teams with a blocked punt himself. This was a dominating performance from Ray as they got it done on all sides of the ball, and it was a solid effort from North Fork. We saw number 1 Payson Penne, the senior, who had 12 carries for 148 yards and a rushing touchdown, try and fight back, but it just was not enough as Ray moves on in the playoffs, getting the win over North Fork 48-14. They will be taking on the winner of the number 8 and 9 seed matchup, which was Highland and Flatirons Academy. This was a snowed out game, both teams in very cold conditions, but Highland knew the task at hand and they went ahead and completed it, going up against Flatirons Academy and shutting them out 24-0. This was a very important game for Highland as they have previously faced Flatirons Academy in the regular season. This is when it mattered the most and they got the job done. Solid efforts from number 2 Elijah Elder, the junior, who had an interception late in the game to close it out to put the ball back in the Huskies' hands. And number 33 Wyatt Chase able to close this one out. No real stats of this game, but I saw a little bit of the clips and saw that Highland was able to close out Flatirons Academy and shut them out 24-0. Moving on, number 4 Centauri taking on number 13 Holyoke. This matchup was played on Monday in a little bit of a later game compared to the rest of the 1A matchups, and this was a tough matchup for Centauri as they were not going to be going up against an easy number 13 seed as Holyoke went in and forced overtime between the two, getting it down to 27 points as regulation ended. Centauri started off on their first drive getting a field goal, but Holyoke in their first drive got a touchdown and won the game. Holyoke upsets number 4 Centauri 33-30. This is a very tough last 2 games for Centauri, losing both to Monte Vista and now to Holyoke, losing the league championship and losing the playoffs. Holyoke, their season remains alive as they move on into the playoffs and will be facing the winner of the 5 and 12 seed matchup, which was number 5 Buena Vista versus number 12 Burlington. And Buena Vista would be the team that comes out on top in this matchup. Buena Vista had some pretty solid performances. We got number 7 Hudson Wingo, the junior, who didn't really get too many passes completed, but when he did, they did result in touchdowns, having 3 completed passes that went 61 yards, 2 of those resulting in touchdowns, and to his favorite receiver, no less, number 4 Knox Reed, the junior, 2 of those receptions for 52 yards, and both of them resulting in touchdowns. And also, Buena Vista was able to get it done on the ground with number 3 Trade Cardwell, the senior, having 17 carries for 104 yards and a touchdown. And also number 16 Eli Shooknecht, who was able to get some valuable yards on the ground, having 13 carries for 139 yards. And Buena Vista was able to outlast Burlington and get the win 21-7. And they will be facing Holyoke in Holyoke this upcoming weekend. Moving on, we have the number 2 seed Forge Christian taking on number 15 Yuma, and this was just a bloodbath. Forge Christian went in and absolutely took care of business against Yuma, getting a dominating 42-0 shutout over Yuma. Huge performances from number 15 Sullivan Strange, the senior, 7 for 10 for 81 yards and a touchdown, also having 35 yards on the ground in 8 carries, as well as a touchdown. A big performance from number 4 Eli Tafoya, the senior, who was able to get it done on offense, having 7 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown, but also leaving an impact on defense, getting 8 tackles, 2 of which were for a loss and a sack. But the big thing for Forge Christian is they're not able to score on just offense or defense. This team can score on special teams, and that's exactly what number 3 Quentin Torres, the junior, did. He had 2 punt return touchdowns, having 3 total punt returns go 146 yards, with his longest being 71 yards to the house. Forge Christian, it seemed like no matter what they could do, they were doing it right, and they took down Yuma 42-0, and they were facing the winner of the number 7 and 10 seed matchup, which was between Meeker and Monte Vista. This was going to be a fairly even matchup despite the seeding. This was definitely fairly close in terms of the teams that were going in. 2 teams that were 7-2, 5-0 in league, and just like their close records, they were close on the scoreboard as well. Meeker was able to get the job done, though, as they get the win 44-34 against Monte Vista. Huge performance from number 32, Cade Blunt, the senior. He had 33 carries that went 290 yards and 3 touchdowns, although losing a fumble. He did also perform well on defense, having 21 total tackles, 10 of which solo, 11 assisted. It was a huge day for Meeker as well for number 22, Clay Crawford, the senior, who had 4 carries for 38 yards and a touchdown. He also got it done on defense, having himself 13 tackles, but also an interception that really shifted the tide in Meeker's favor, and couldn't have done it without number 11, Cade Mills, the sophomore, the quarterback leading that offense, having 10 carries for 31 yards and also 2 touchdowns himself. This was a big game for Meeker as they got the win over Monte Vista 44-34, and will be facing Forge Christian next week in the second round. And finally, our last 2 matchups, number 6 Wiggins taking on number 11 Colorado Springs Christian. Wiggins was definitely not going to lose this matchup. It was just a ground and pound dominating performance from Wiggins as they faced Colorado Springs Christian. They knew that Colorado Springs Christian was not going to be an easy team to beat, so they made sure they ran it down their throats. Led by number 4 Jason Loosberg, the senior. 18 carries for 201 yards and a staggering 4 touchdowns to dominate on the ground. Also saw some ground and pound from number 22 Jorge Mendez, the senior. 15 carries for 138 yards and a touchdown. Also getting it done on defense, having himself 10 tackles. Quarterback J.R. Meyer, number 5, was 2 for 2 for 66 yards and a touchdown, but also scored on the ground as well, having 14 yards and a touchdown and 5 carries. And they also had a solid performance from the defense, led by number 6 Marcus Steinbar, the senior, who had himself 9 tackles, a sack, and an interception. Wiggins got it done against Colorado Springs Christian and will be a formidable foe for the winner of the number 3 and 14 seed matchup, and that was Lyman and Platte Valley. Now, there are no stats for this one, but this matchup was played at Strasburg High School, and Lyman was able to get the job done against Platte Valley in what was a very close matchup that was low scoring on both sides. This was going to be an interesting one. The top dog in 1A in Lyman facing off against a team that has predominantly played in 2A for many years in Platte Valley, and Lyman was able to get the job done against them 20-10. Lyman will be moving on to face Wiggins in the playoffs next week, which finally leads me to my Playmaker of the week. Now, I only have 3 candidates for this week based off of the stats that were provided. So we only have the 3 to go off of so far. Let's get right into it, starting off with Ray's number 1, Casey Midcap, the senior. He was 5 for 6 through the air, having 128 yards and 3 touchdowns, also having 6 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns in Ray's dominating win over North Fork. He is one of my candidates for Playmaker of the Week. Also, Meeker's number 32, Cade Blunt, the senior. He had a lot more opportunities to get it done on the ground and took full advantage, having 33 carries for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns, as well as losing that 1 fumble. But he redeemed himself, having 21 tackles on defense as well, 10 of which were solo and 11 assisted. And finally, for my last Playmaker of the Week, another running back that broke the 200-yard mark, none other than number 4, Jason Lewisburg out of Wiggins. He had 18 carries for 201 yards and 4 touchdowns in Wiggins' win over Colorado Springs Christian. And so, for my Playmaker of the Week, I usually like to pick Playmakers of the Week based off of, you know, who can get it done on offense and defense. But because we're in the playoffs, there is a lot to do with the opponent that they play against, you know. And this reason, I'm going to have to select Cade Blunt as the Playmaker of the Week this week for his performance against Monte Vista. Monte Vista is not an easy team to beat, and Meeker just took care of business by sticking to what they know best, and that's getting it done on the ground. And almost getting 300 yards rushing is just incredible. So congratulations, Cade Blunt, as he is my Playmaker of the Week for the first round of the 1A football playoffs. And what is going on, everyone? I'm Phoenix Barons, and we're going to go through the playoff predictions for the 1A 2024 Colorado High School Football second round of the playoffs. We went through the first round last week and saw some incredible matchups, and now we are entering the second round of these playoffs, and we're going to go through, and I'm going to briefly go through each matchup and give predictions from the Playmakers Corner crew on who we think is going to win this matchup. And I'm also going to go through some predictions from Anthony Garcia of Mile High Prep Report as well. He was gracious enough to give his take on each playoff matchup in 1A football. So let's get right into it. So last week we saw the first round conclude, and now we are going into the second round. Based on those matchups, we only saw 7 of the top 8 seeds moving on into the playoffs. We only saw 1 real upset of a lower seed taking on a top seed, but we'll get into that later on. Let's start off with the first matchup being Ray versus Highland. Ray had defeated number 16 North Fork last week and will be facing Highland, and Highland is coming off of their shutout win over Flatirons Academy. I mean crow a little bit. I had Flatirons Academy upsetting Highland, and Highland absolutely proved me wrong. But they're going to be having an intense challenge going up against Ray at Ray High School. So this will be a very, very fun matchup to watch. Right now, as it stands, I currently have Ray winning this matchup. They should have no issue facing Highland and will be ready for whatever Highland brings to the table. They have the experience and the talent to back it up, and that's pretty much what most of Playmakers Corner also agreed on, with Simon, Ray, Gideon, and Cody all agreeing that Ray will win this matchup. They're just way too stacked at the high end. They get to host again at home, and it's hard to see this team losing at all, nonetheless, at home especially. And Anthony Garcia said that he thinks Ray is one of the more complete teams in Class 1A. They have many different weapons, and he thinks that they will still have a few tricks up their sleeve. Ray defensively proved to him last year how effective they were at stopping the pass, and look for them to bring the heat this week. So Everyone's kind of leaning towards Ray as the top team, not only winning this matchup, but also winning state later on down the line. Moving on to the next matchup, it'll be Holyoke taking on Buena Vista. Holyoke is coming off of their upset win over Centauri this past Monday. They went in and had an overtime thriller against Centauri and came away with a big win, being the only low seed team with an upset over a top seeded team. And for that reason, they will be hosting Buena Vista this week. This will be a really good matchup, and it's kind of mixed a little bit. I have Buena Vista in this one. I mean, they've been dominating all season, and they just have the playmakers to make it possible. Holyoke's just been a little up and down, but they can definitely beat some top teams, so I'm not going to be looking past Holyoke at all for this matchup, and I would definitely not be shocked if they came away with a win. Buena Vista will definitely have a very, very tough challenge ahead of them. In terms of the Playmakers Corner crew, most have Buena Vista as their prediction for winning. Gideon, however, chose Holyoke as the winner for this matchup. Gideon had this to say about why he chose Holyoke. He knows it's a controversial take, but the Dragons know what to do at just the right time. It may be just beating Centauri and Lyman. The Demons are good, and either way, it will be close. Holyoke can beat Lyman. Lyman can beat Buena Vista. Transitive property doesn't always work here, but he thinks Holyoke has the momentum, and that's a fair way to look at it. Especially Holyoke getting a big win over Centauri, they're going to have a lot of momentum riding on their win as being able to host this playoff matchup against Buena Vista. Anthony Garcia has Buena Vista. He says, though, that he worries about the short turnaround for Holyoke. They looked very impressive in their win over Centauri, but going OT on a Monday with the game on Saturday could be rough. Buena Vista barely sneaked by Burlington and will have to play much better to get by Holyoke. I wouldn't be surprised if Holyoke advances into the semifinals as they play very physical defense. It is a very interesting matchup to see, and we'll definitely have a lot of fun watching this one. And Buena Vista, be careful, Holyoke. They're coming. They're coming to surprise some folks here in 1A. The next matchup is Forge Christian taking on Meeker. Forge Christian had a dominating shutout win over Yuma in the first round, and Meeker had an intensely close matchup with Monte Vista. I have Forge Christian winning this matchup over Meeker. Meeker will definitely be one of the tougher opponents Forge will face on their journey to state, and they cannot look past them at all. Meeker is definitely a very tough team, but Forge has the talent to outplay Meeker 100%. But Meeker is a very hard team to beat just because of their mentality and what they bring to their table. But Forge Christian, they've been a 2A team for a very long time and have dominated in that scene, and this is their first year in 1A, and they have completely cleaned the floor with the competition. So it is no surprise that most of Playmakers Corner are leaning towards Forge Christian in this one. Anthony Garcia also has Forge Christian winning this matchup. And he states, if Meeker can keep the big plays and under wraps, then they will have a shot in this game. Meeker offensive line must hold up against a good Forge Christian defense. Two completely different systems square off, but Forge has too many weapons for Meeker to stop. And that's kind of the majority of how people see Forge Christian as they take on Meeker. They're going to be a very, very tough team to beat, and this will be one of the top matchups for sure in the playoffs. And finally, our last matchup in 1A, Wiggins versus Lyman. These two teams have faced each other before. They are league opponents, and we saw Wiggins keep it within 2 points against Lyman midway through the season before Lyman would drop a couple games in league. This is going to be a very, very good 1A matchup, and I cannot wait to see how this one transpires. This matchup will be hosted at Lyman High School. The majority of Playmakers Corner and Anthony Garcia will be riding with Lyman. However, Gino did pick Wiggins, and his reason for choosing Wiggins, he stated, I just don't think that Lyman has enough gas in the tank to get by Wiggins right now. Wiggins barely lost to Lyman earlier in the season, and we all know how tough it is to beat a team twice. I wouldn't doubt if Lyman found a way to win this, but I got to go with my gut and say that Wiggins is going to take down the reigning champs here in round 2. So we do have a little bit of an upset watch, but I selected Lyman because they were put on their heels by Wiggins in their last matchup and even struggled to put away Platte Valley in the playoffs. But let's remember that Platte Valley used to be a 2A team for many years, and Lyman took care of them traveling to Strasbourg for that one. And this is a team Lyman is familiar with, and when they're in the playoffs, it's nothing but business that Lyman will be able to handle. Lyman is a different beast when they're in the playoffs. They do know how to get the job done and close it out. There is a genuine concern that this isn't necessarily the best Lyman team that we've ever seen, but Lyman is still a great team, and they have a solid foundation and to be able to take care of business. Anthony Garcia's reason for choosing Lyman was the biggest difference will be Lyman is used to winning in the playoffs. Don't expect either team to be scoring in bunches in this game. It will live up to the billing. And that is absolutely true. I cannot wait to see how this matchup goes, and I cannot wait to see who moves on into the Final Four. There is a lot of good teams left, and we have a lot to look forward to. So thank you guys so much for listening, and I cannot wait to see you all next week for the round 2 results. And a big thank you to Anthony Garcia from the Mile High Prep Report for his takes and his predictions for the second round of the playoffs.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for this segment on the game between Montezuma Cortez and Berthoud that happened on Saturday, November 9th of 2024. And let me tell you all, folks, this was a very exciting game. I honestly thought it would be closer than it ended up being, but it was still a fun one to be able to see one of the most remote teams in the state play a team that I watch basically every season. So, I'm just going to get started real quick here. Montezuma Cortez in this matchup were the 11 seed, and Berthoud was the 6 seed in these 2A playoffs. And Montezuma Cortez started out, they elected to defer, and they started with 2 straight penalties on the opening kickoff. Went out twice, and then Hudson Hurst forced a fumble on the 5-yard line that was recovered by Bobby Likes. After a 3 and out, the Panthers allowed a touchdown, going down 0-7 with 4:05 in the first quarter. After another fruitless offensive drive, Rusty Snyder and Carson Osment would share a sack. And in the second quarter, Cooper Sofa would catch an interception before Brady Dale would get a pass deflection, but the Panthers would allow another touchdown, going down 14-0 with about 4 minutes left in the second quarter. Tay Wheat would return the kickoff for 30 yards, but the Panthers would throw a pick to go on defense. After allowing another touchdown with 1:07 to be down 0-21 and making it 0-28 with 10 seconds left, this game was as good as done, unfortunately. In the second half, though, Wheat would return the opening kickoff for 25, but the Panthers would allow another score with 9:19 left in the third quarter, making it 0-35 that they were down. Colby McMillian would run for 20, and in the fourth quarter, Wheat would run for 12 and throw to Sofa on a trick play that would make it 6-42 with 9:24 left in this game. Wyatt Oliver would get a tackle for loss, and on offense, Wheat would run for 30 before McMillian would also throw to Parker Conrad as time expired to make it 12-42 as the final score of the season for Montezuma Cortez. Before I move on to our playmaker of the game for the Montezuma Cortez Panthers, I do want to have a moment of acknowledgement for the seniors on this squad. It takes a lot to get your team to the playoffs. It takes a lot to work hard enough to propel your team to this point. And I'm glad to hear that you made it this far, and I wish you all the best of luck in your forthcoming endeavors. And so, thank you to Marley Lynch, Colby McMillian, Houston Hurst, Tay Wheat, Shaoki Knapp, Bobby Likes, Aiden Sofa, Uziel Trujillo, Brady Dale, Aiden Ray, Braden Seymour, Jordan Jackson, Hayden Kibble, and Daniel Ramirez. Now, I was able to catch up with the playmaker of the game here for Montezuma Cortez, Tay Wheat, after the game, and here is what Tay had to say, not just about this game, but about his long and illustrious career at Montezuma Cortez.
What's up? This is Gideon here with Tay Wheat from Montezuma Cortez High School. Now, Tay, I know it's not the way that you wanted it to end, but this is the end of an illustrious high school career for you. What's the next step for you moving forward?
The next step for me is just try to not have this be my last game. I'm trying to keep playing. I haven't been really putting my name out there, so I'm gonna try to do that. I have a film, but I just need to get my name out there, start emailing coaches, try to at least play at the next level. No, it doesn't matter anywhere.
All right. And in that vein, what word would you use to describe not your game today, but your game as an individual?
I would just say, dang, that's a good question. As an individual, one word, I would just say, I don't want to say consistent because I wasn't consistent today, but I'd say, I don't know. That's a good question. I might have to think about that one.
That's all right. But that does kind of play into what would you say was the story of the season here for you, for the Panthers coming into 2024 and then until this moment?
I would say the story was just not at least have a winning record or having a winning season, because last year we didn't even make the playoffs. So I wanted to at least make it here, and we did, and we should have executed, but we didn't. But I mean, it was a good one.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
And last one. What was your favorite moment from your high school career?
My favorite moment was whenever we beat Rifle my sophomore year after they beat us in the regular season so we could advance to the semifinals. That was definitely my favorite memory.
I remember I remember watching the stat sheet that night, and I'm just like, wait a minute, those Panthers.
Yeah, it was a good game. That was my best moment ever, for sure.
Well, it was very, very nice to meet you, Tay. If there's one thing that I learned when I met you, you're an honest man. Tay Wheat's the kind of guy that just tells it how it is, how he sees it, and he makes the most of what he's got. And Colorado ball is going to be different without him there. And best of luck moving forward, and best of luck with finding a place to call home in college. Now for Berthoud's side of this game, the victorious side of this matchup. The number 6 seed would start with, funnily enough, a false start, but Skylar Stryker, the quarterback, would throw to Cade Anderson for 14, and then to Bowen Casper-Bauer for 10. After a fumble, Benjamin Schrader got a tackle for loss, which helped force a 3-and-out. Stryker then threw to Jaden Michaelis for a touchdown, making it 7-0 with 4:05 on the clock in the first quarter. Next up, Peyton Evans would get a tackle for loss before Elisha Mosier would get a sack. After a punt on offense, Evans got another tackle for loss to end the first quarter, and David Pelfrey would just destroy a receiver breaking up a pass. And then Schrader got a tackle for loss before Michaelis would catch an interception. Stryker then threw to Michaelis for 8, and Casper-Bauer would run for 9 before running in a touchdown, making it 14-0 with about 4 minutes left. Mosier and Tanner Davis would share a sack, but then a roughing the kicker penalty on a punt was made unimportant by a Cole Bialek interception. Ethan Hoffmeister would run for 14 and then ran in a touchdown to make it 21-0 with 1:07 left in the first half. It felt like that was going to be the score heading into halftime, but the defense would force a 3-and-out, and Stryker would throw to Jason Newbill for 15 and then to Weston Petrowski for a touchdown, going up 28-0 with 10 seconds left. And after that, it was officially out of hand. Mosier got a tackle for loss, and then Stryker threw to Anderson, who hooked it back to Michaelis for a 40-yard touchdown, making it 35-0 with 9:19 in the third. Back on offense, Hoffmeister ran for 10, and then Casper-Bauer went for 14, and in the fourth quarter, The Spartans would allow 2 touchdowns, making the final score 42-12. Ultimately, it was running clock there in that fourth quarter, so it flew by like a bird at that point. But one player that was flying in the passing lanes for against Montezuma Cortez here, and that was consistently putting pressure on the quarterback, was the edge rusher, senior captain Elisha Mosier from Berthoud High School. I was able to catch up with Elisha after the game, and here's what he had to say about this particular matchup with the Montezuma Cortez Panthers.
What's up? This is Gideon here with Elisha Mosier from Berthoud High School. You got like 3 sacks today, man. How you feeling?
I feel great. It's just it was a great day to come out and play at Max Mar, and we definitely came with an intensity that, it's in this football weather, and we're ready for this game.
Hell yeah. And that's actually something that a lot of teams around the state have been dealing with, is that inclement weather. And in a more pass-heavy system, some people were worried heading into this game with all the snow. How did you feel heading into this game regardless of the weather, and how do you feel now that it's won?
Honestly, I felt pretty good going into it. We got about 3 days where it was just snow. Yesterday was, field had, as you can see, the field was covered in snow. So we just kept throwing the ball in practice, get our receivers ready. Our receivers, we got some dogs out there, so they're ready. Skylar's driving the ball, so I was pretty confident coming to this game that our offense they were gonna hit pretty good.
And moving into next week against TCA, you're going to be facing one of the top quarterbacks in 2A and Andrew Brown. What were you looking at today in the offensive line that you're going to be carrying over into next week to try to get consistent pressures on their quarterback?
So, yeah, TCA, they got a really balanced offensive approach. Their quarterback, he's pretty good, but definitely I kind of use my speed to kind of get some pressure, but also, sometimes throwing a little bull rush, a little power in there. So just watching some film, realizing that some of the guys may get in their weaknesses, I try to get pretty deep into the film and then coming out and just using my pass rush moves to get the constant pressure, because it's a lot harder to throw under pressure.
True that. And on that throw under pressure, it didn't seem like there was anything the offensive line could do to stop you today.
Yeah.
What were you seeing in that offensive line that allowed you to consistently get the quarterback and get in positions of creating hurries?
So, first of all, we got a stellar defensive line. We got Ben Schroeder, Peyton Evans, Sean Barajas. So while the offensive line is mostly focusing on them, I noticed the tackles were a little slow to get out. So just being able to shoot off that line and kind of time up some blitzes, use my hands to push them away, it's just made it really easy for me to get in that backfield today.
All right. And what was your favorite moment from this game?
I would say my favorite moment was definitely, either the hook and ladder to Jay Michaelis. That was freaking awesome. Or blitzing around the edge and getting the pressure and throwing the quarterback down where he threw the interception to my best friend, Cole Bialik. And even though he's got a nub, that was freaking awesome. So,
thank you very much, Elisha. It was a pleasure to be able to speak with you and get some more perspective on what you saw in this game. And that is 100% true what he said about the O-line. They were very focused on some of those bigger bodies, which allowed guys like Elisha to get very consistent pressure on the quarterback and just force, 2 interceptions. Both those interceptions were off of hurries or while the quarterback was going down in what would have otherwise been a sack. But one of those interceptions was caught by our playmaker of the game for the Berthoud Spartans. Yes, that is number 6, senior wide receiver Jaden Michaelis. I was able to catch up with Jaden as well after this one, and here's what he had to say about this win over Montezuma Cortez.
All right. What's up? This is Gideon here with Jaden. Is it Michaelis? Michaelis from Berthoud High School. Jaden, how do you feel advancing to the second round against TCA?
It feels great. I'm excited to play in the next round. We definitely took care of business and proved to everyone that we belong in the playoffs, and we belong to go deep in the playoffs this year, and proved last year was a fluke. So.
All right. And, a lot of people were looking at the graduating class from last year and were a little bit concerned. You're losing the production of the Larson brothers. You're losing Darren. But you guys come out and do amazingly in the best league in the 2A classification. How do you think that preparation in the regular season ended up contributing to a win like this in the playoffs?
There was definitely doubts from a lot of people since we had a lot of big stars on our team that were seniors and graduating, and we were mostly concerned about who would fill those positions and who was going to perform this year. But I think that really helped out in finding the places we belong and proving people that we can still be good even without those star players that were very good last year.
All right. And what was your favorite moment from this game today? Because that hook and ladder was awesome, man.
That hook and ladder was a lot of fun. But my favorite was probably my first touchdown, breaking some tackles in the end zone, like a hard run. That's what I love to do, and that was probably my favorite part.
And thank you very much, Jaden, for stopping to talk with me. Next up, as you could probably gather, the season is over for the Montezuma Cortez Panthers, but the Berthoud Spartans will be moving on to play the Classical Academy Titans either on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. We shall see, down in Colorado Springs at that absolute nightmare of a stadium to park at. If someone from Berthoud is listening, make sure that everyone knows you might need to take a shuttle bus. The parking there is bad. They built a stadium, like a concert venue, like a mile away, and they have a contract with the school. It's a whole thing. But if you're listening to this, I hope that you are having a good day. I hope that you are drinking as much water as you can. Stay hydrated. If you're driving while listening to this, keep your eyes on the road. And stay safe. I hope you all have a good day. Stay safe. And I'll catch y'all on the flip. Peace.
What is good, y'all? This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and I am very excited to bring you some 2A Round 1 action here from the playoffs between TCA and Pagosa Springs. TCA is coming into this matchup undefeated, while Pagosa Springs has had their fair share of struggles this season, but they are a very tough team, and me and Simon were definitely expecting a close matchup in this one, at least within 2 scores. But as you'll see soon, that is not what happened. But let's not waste any more time here and jump right into this recap. Pagosa Springs will start off with the ball here at the 23-yard line after a Colton Lucero return. Colton Lucero's run on first down only goes for 2 yards as he's stopped by Grant Keaton and Elijah Wright. And then on 2nd and 8, Lucero's run is stopped by Andrew Richens to make it 3rd and 8. On 3rd down, a handoff to Lucero is stopped by a gang of Titans, so it will be 4th and 5, and Pagosa will punt here with 10 minutes left in the first quarter. Joshua Knuckles got a nice return there, and it is 1st and 10 on the Pagosa 41 here for TCA. Riley Romine takes the carry a long way here on the first play of the drive, and it will be 1st and goal at the 2-yard line here for TCA. On 1st and goal, Avon Cole stops a run up the middle, so it will be 2nd and 1. On 2nd and 1, Riley Romine takes the carry right and powers his way inside for the touchdown. It is 7-0. TCA has the lead with 9:05 left after the extra point. Pagosa Springs would get the ball back here, but they would actually end up going 3 and out, with J.D. Packard making some huge plays here to help force the punt. The QB, Creed Dozier, is back to punt, and he takes the snap, and it is a fake, and he launches it deep, but the pass is incomplete, so it will be 1st and 10 for TCA at their own 46. On 1st down, a quick pass from the QB, Andrew Brown, in the flats to Kieran Reeker goes for 7 yards. And then on 2nd and short, a run goes for a 1st down at the Pagosa 47-yard line. On 1st and 10, Andrew Brown finds Khalil Blush for a big gain, and it will be 1st and 10 at the Pagosa 28-yard line. On 1st and 10, a speed option goes to Jackson Schiffer, plus a personal foul on Pagosa, and it will be 1st and 10 at the 11-yard line. On 1st and 10, Andrew Brown's quick pass to Matthew Wright, and he goes untouched into the end zone. It is 14-0 after the extra point with 5:49 left here in the first quarter. Pagosa would get the ball back here, but they would end up going 3 and out once again, as Hayden Gustafson and Alex Gould were the ones making plays on that drive to force the punt. So it will be 1st and 10 at the TCA 31 here for TCA following the punt. Andrew Brown keeps it, but he is stopped by Creed Dozier after 6 yards. On 2nd and 4, Jackson Schipfer takes the off tackle up the sideline for a huge gain. It will be 1st and 10 at the Pagosa 40-yard line. On 1st down, following that big run from Schipfer, Andrew Brown has Hayden Gustafson open over the middle, and Gustafson goes untouched into the end zone, and it is 21-0 now after the extra point with 3:05 left in the first quarter. It will be 1st and 10 for Pagosa at their own 19-yard line after the return. And they are down 3 scores here, so they definitely need a touchdown if they want any sort of chance of staying in this game and making it competitive. On 1st and 10, Colton Lucero takes the direct snap to the left for a nice gain, and it will be 1st and 10 at the Pagosa 38-yard line. Another Lucero run goes for 4 yards, and then J.D. Packard absolutely smokes Colton Lucero on the run outside to make it 3rd and 5. On 3rd down, a pass interference on a deep pass makes it 1st and 10 for Pagosa at the TCA 42-yard line. After the pass interference, a Colton Lucero run goes for 4 yards, and then a Lucero run is stopped after a yard to make it 3rd and 5 as J.D. Packard got another nice hit there. And that will take us to the end of the first quarter. TCA is up 21-0 on Pagosa Springs. On the first play of the second quarter, Creed Dozier's screen pass to Seth Ziegler is picked off by Elijah Wright as he jumps on it and takes it all the way for the pick 6. It is 28-0 after the extra point with 11:50 left in the second quarter. And that, folks, is where we will stop this recap. TCA got the win here over Pagosa 49-7, and they will face Berthoud next Saturday in round 2. I want to take some time to thank the Pagosa Springs seniors for everything that they've done for that program and just everything that they've done for the sport as a whole in the state of Colorado. This wasn't a great matchup for them against TCA, but honestly, Coach V and I thought they might have a chance with how much it snowed this past week, and we really thought that run game was going to be more effective. But TCA came out and they were just ready for anything Pagosa had for them, and ultimately the better team won. The Pirates still have a ton of talent on that roster, and I expect them to be back here next year without a doubt. And with that, folks, this is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast checking out, and I will see you all after the round 2 games next week. Peace out.
All right, Coach V here, and I got your 3A recap in the last week of the regular season here, so let's go ahead and hop into it. A couple Thursday games. I feel like most of these were rescheduled, but it's just listed as games played on Thursday, November 7th, so take that as you will. But to start, Harrison, they played Palmer, and they would take care of them pretty easily, 36-0. Unfortunately, no stats for Harrison here. For Palmer, kind of a tough go. Played their seniors. They did start a freshman in Messiah Mestis Rogan, which is definitely something promising to look forward to in the future. But, you know, not too much to say here as they will be missing the playoffs. Harrison will also be missing the playoffs as this game, I mean, they were going to come up a little bit short anyways. They needed to win some games before, and they just didn't. But they end on a win for them. Green Mountain, they would go ahead and play Skyview and take care of them pretty easily, 48-14. Simon Lunsford, 9 of 17, 156 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no picks, playing an efficient game. You also have the senior DeMarco Villalobos with 83 rushing yards and a touchdown. This team combined for 195 rushing yards, by the way, there, as Green Mountain takes care of Skyview. Moving on, Lutheran does the same to Kennedy, beating them 55-0. This one was over at half. They were up by 48 already. But Eli Abramson, 6 of 12, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. On the ground, Sawyer Wald, only 8 carries, but 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Peter Olney, by the way, with a 42 rushing yard attempt there. So there you go. Lutheran takes care of Kennedy. Holy Family, they beat Stanley Lake 44-26. A loss here might have put Holy Family out of the playoffs, so this was big for them. Montezuma, 6 of 12, 94 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Also, 88 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on this one. Browan Willis with 150 yards and a touchdown. Anthony Scott with 142 yards in this game. For Stanley Lake, unfortunately, the last game for Liam Graham, their star senior running back, he went off for 160 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also had 2 receptions for 103 yards and a touchdown, but would fall short. That would end his very illustrious career here for Stanley Lake, and he's for sure a next level player. So there you go there. But unfortunately, his career will end there. Now moving on to Friday, November 8th here, or the games at least scheduled for Friday, November 8th. We have a number of games. Let's start with Littleton versus Hinckley here. Hinckley gets their first win in a very long time. It might have been a couple years, but they beat them 28-22. Littleton was originally going to forfeit, or it looked like they were going to forfeit all of their games here, but they do play this one, and unfortunately it is a loss for them. Rifle, they play Steamboat Springs. They beat them 28-21 here. Isaac Valencia in his last game, 153 yards and 3 touchdowns in this effort for Steamboat Springs. Unfortunately, they're probably not going to make the playoffs already before, but still something to build on. Junior Thomas Krupp, 142 rushing yards. Eli Beaver, the sophomore, 46 yards and 2 touchdowns in this one, but unfortunately came up short in that one. Greeley Central versus Windsor. Windsor wins big, 42-0. James Beats, now the starting quarterback, 3 of 4 for 34 yards. But on the ground, they pounded the rock here. Oh my gosh. Sizakzon, I want to say the junior, 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tegan Cole with 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Trip Thomas with 86 yards and a touchdown in this winning effort. Pueblo East, they will go ahead and end Pueblo County's bid for a playoff spot here, winning 33-20. Dolph Kalous, 4 of 9, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Also rushed for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns on 20 carries. Justice Freeman, 165 rushing yards, and Isaiah Trujillo had a rushing touchdown, as well as a receiving touchdown in this game. For Pueblo County, unfortunately, Cohen Glenn's career ends here. A tough go, 1 touchdown to 5 picks, also 56 rushing yards. Patrick Naga, his career will end as well with 58 rushing yards, also 2 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown in this one, as unfortunately County, their season will end here. Then we have Timnath versus Northridge. Timnath beating them 21-14. Kyle Nelson, a senior, 7 of 12, 101 yards and a touchdown for them. Vince Hawkalter in his last game, 102 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns in this one. And then Carter Gaines with a receiving touchdown. For Northridge, Justin Thill in his last game, 9 of 23 for 132 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Did have 59 rushing yards and a touchdown in this one, but unfortunately would just come up a little bit short. Then we have Roosevelt versus Mountain View. Mountain View would win this one, and this would be a big one as they would punch their ticket to the playoffs here. They would beat Roosevelt 32-22. Cam Frost not passing it a lot this game, only 2 of 3 for 24 yards and a touchdown, but they were able to run it pretty well. Keegan Amons, 84 rushing yards and a touchdown. Troy Schnee with 79 rushing yards, and Tyson Mayers-Benz with 23 yards and a rushing touchdown. Also Cam Frost with a rushing touchdown in this one. For Roosevelt, unfortunately, they drop a tough one. Luke Vigil, 28 carries for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. You also have Ryder Timkovich, I want to say, with 54 rushing yards and a touchdown. They played 2 different quarterbacks. This time it looks like Jackson Craig got the majority of the snaps here. 5 of 17 for only 52 yards, though. No Lucero with only 1 reception in this one as Roosevelt falls to Mountain View. Palisade, they play Glenwood Springs. Glenwood Springs trying to look for a playoff berth, but Palisade would win 35-14 here. Easton Embry, 72 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cade Carter, 51 yards and a touchdown in this one. For Glenwood Springs, Mason Markovich in his final game, 91 rushing yards and a touchdown. Zach Bullock, the junior quarterback, 91 rushing yards and a touchdown in this game, but unfortunately, they would come up just a little bit short. Pueblo Central would then take care of Coronado in their last game, 59-7. Amari Brown, 290 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns in this game. For Coronado, Thomas Buckmiller, 16 of 36, 204 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Zen Groves with a great game here in his final one, 6 receptions for 135 yards, but unfortunately, Pueblo Central will go ahead and win on top there. And then last but not least, Canyon City, they play Sierra and they beat them 40-0. This would be the final game of their season as they would just be outside here. Trey Schumacher, 5 of 5 for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns against them. Jake Adamich, 97 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns on only 3 carries. And then Cody Varner with 41 for a touchdown. Gavin Reddick with 25 yards and a touchdown in this final game of the season for them. Moving on to Saturday, we have a number of games. We have Severance versus Fort Morgan, and Severance ends the season strong here, beating Fort Morgan 21-6. No stats from that game available, unfortunately. Moving on to Wheat Ridge versus Summit. Wheat Ridge pretty much out of the playoff race at this point, but they would win this final one 22-18, a good win for their seniors. Isaac McCune, 11-14, 211 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Devin Castillo, another senior, 41 rushing yards and a touchdown. And then Bennett Wilkes, the UNC commit, 9 receptions, 167 yards and a touchdown in that game. For Summit here, Simeon Ryan, 16 of 27 for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns to 1 pick. They were able to run the ball for 279 yards, but just not able to get the win. Vander Weerlop, 100 yards and I think just 100 rushing yards on 10 carries here. You have Barre Jane, the senior, with 63 rushing yards, and then Dylan Gonsholt with 58 yards and a touchdown in this game for Summit. Moving on here, I was able to watch that Discovery Canyon and Pueblo South game, but was not able to just take down notes. I didn't expect to, but this ended up being a banger. But DCC wins this one 49-40, winning the shootout. Hayden Jones with a standout game, but no stats available for this one. Caden Herrera, though, with a great game, 24-33, 456 yards and 5 touchdowns. 2 going to Jake Pisciata, 1 to Naaman Robinson on a big 50-yard touchdown. 1 to Landon Cordova, and then 1 to David Dietz, but it would not be enough in this effort here. Then we have Thompson Valley versus Pomona, the battle for the 1 seed. Thompson Valley wins this one 16-7 here. Finley Lucas getting the start in at quarterback again. 53 passing yards and 72 rushing yards and a touchdown in this win. For Pomona, they just could not get this run game really going, at least efficiently, that is. Ethan Vu had 1 50-yard touchdown, and that would be pretty much it for Pomona as they struggled in this one. Tucker Ingersoll, the sophomore, 8 of 17, 73 yards in this one, but they were not able to really get anything going consistently, that is. Evergreen plays Conifer here, and Conifer would win a big one to punch their ticket to the playoffs. They would beat them 28-16. Benson White, 14 of 22, 184 yards and 2 touchdowns, also 69 rushing yards. And then you have Carson Wolonsky with 169 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in this game. For Evergreen, Josh Bittner doing it all for them once more, 58 rushing yards and a touchdown, 50 passing yards, but it would not be enough to take down Conifer. Then last but not least, we have Lewis Palmer. They would play Pueblo Centennial. Lewis Palmer needing to win this one to even have a chance at making the playoffs, and they did, 56-7 here. Their senior running back, Jaden Pagano, 5 carries, 98 yards and 3 touchdowns. Makai Mays, 37 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and Gregory Moore, the sophomore, 4 for 36 and a touchdown to beat Centennial. But unfortunately, it would not be enough here, as they would low-key be snubbed from a playoff spot here, which is just tough for them. So there you go there. That is your 3A recap of the final week of the regular season here. What's good, y'all? Coach V here, and I got your 3A playoff preview and predictions as well. I'm basically going to go ahead and talk about all the matchups here, and as I do that, I'm going to preview every single team that made these playoffs here, the 16 teams in 3A. This is going to be a tough playoffs for sure. But, before we begin, let me just go ahead and start with just naming out all the matchups real quick. So at the top of the bracket, we have number 1 Thompson Valley playing number 16 Holy Family. They'll play the winners of Discovery Canyon and Pueblo East. Then we have number 4 Palisade versus number 13 Severance. They'll play the winners of number 5 Green Mountain versus number 12 Roosevelt. Then we have number 3 Pomona versus number 14 Conifer. They'll play the winners of number 6 Windsor and number 11 Mountain View. Then we have a good one on this side, number 7 Pueblo Central versus number 10 Lutheran. They'll play the winners of number 2 Meade and number 15 Pueblo South. So a lot of great teams to talk about here, but like I said, I'm going to talk about each team, each matchup, and then I'll do the predictions from myself, Cody, Gino, Phoenix, and Gideon right after. But let's go ahead and start with this first matchup. We have number 1 Thompson Valley versus number 16 Holy Family. Let's talk about Thompson Valley. First off, perfect 10-0. I think the only undefeated team in 3A. That includes big wins here over Berthoud 14-7, Loveland 20-0, Severance 6-0, Roosevelt 28-21, and then Pomona most recently last Saturday. That would be November 9th when they won 16-7. Now, talk about some key players. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. We have seniors Joseph Urtia. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, but we have him, Garrett Hendrickson, Tim Slover, and Wes Bebo. Thompson Valley's going to run the ball on offense and maybe throw some shorter passes and easy screens here, but they're going to run the ball here, get the ball in the hands of these four. These four are their biggest contributors, mostly on the ground here, but they are some of their leading pass catchers as well. But like I said, Thompson Valley, they're going to pound the rock. They're going to hand it off to one of these four for sure. Now, something that's really interesting is that it looks like, and I say it looks like because this player has taken the majority of the snaps at quarterback the last couple games, but freshman quarterback Finley Lucas has kind of hopped in at quarterback and proven to be a solid quarterback as both a runner and a passer here, especially down the stretch. I think these playoffs will test if he can step up when they need a play, though. Obviously, you have your 4 playmakers there, but if your quarterback could bring you a balanced offense, that is big time as well. So there you go there. But I think the strength really lies in the defense of this team, led by junior linebacker Landry Suarez. The 6-foot, 215-pound linebacker has had a good year and has been their lead tackler with 63 total tackles, holding it down over the middle. But this front 7 for Thompson Valley is legit. You have seniors in CJ James and Dan Gray, as well as junior Josiah Manu. This group of upperclassmen will lead them to a championship effort, if any. And they're a big group. Like I said, Dan Gray listed at 6'4", 210. CJ James, 6'5", 212. Josiah Manu, their defensive tackle, 6'5", 290. They're going to make a lot of teams who primarily run the ball struggle. And they do have a good enough pass rush to slow down some passing teams as well, but this is a unit that is going to shut down the run, and they've won a lot of games because they were able to do that. Now, talking game plan against Holy Family, they're going to win with their defense. If they can push all their chips into a winning game plan, in my opinion, I think it's going to be using up the time on offense by running the ball to rest this defense and then playing the field positioning game. It won't always be pretty, but in 3A, they have the experience to understand that you need to take every opportunity presented to you. And I think this defense, if they could lock in here, play well, not make any bad mistakes, as in bad mental errors, then I think they'll be just fine here. And then on offense, you got to pound the rock, right? Against Holy Family, we'll talk about them in a little bit. I think that is definitely a little bit easier to do there, but you need both sides helping each other out here. If they are put in a position where they got to pass their way out of it, I think that's where things get dicey. And on top of that, I think one of their biggest weaknesses is that they've also just struggled against passing teams. Berthoud, a team they played earlier on in the season, who they beat 14-7, still threw for 300 plus yards on them in a close win. If a couple of those picks were touchdowns, who knows, right? Roosevelt, they threw 3 touchdowns on them in a close win. The only outlier is Mountain View, who we know likes to pass it, but honestly, they're just much bigger than Mountain View up front across the board, so that kind of cancels that out. And so that is one of the weaknesses that they have here. Like I said, up front, they're going to stop the run. They're going to do well against that, but I don't think they have a consistent passing game. Not really. Not on the level of a Holy Family, that's for sure. And then second, I think if they are caught in a situation where they got to defend the pass multiple times, things could get a little dicey. Now for Holy Family, they are the last seed, the 16th seed here. They barely make it into the playoffs with a 6-4 record. But the only playoff caliber team that they beat was Lewis Palmer, 56-21, who arguably was snubbed from making the playoffs here, but they did beat him, so that's why they're in. Now, other than that, they've had some tough losses against Roosevelt, 38-21, Pueblo East, 63-42, Meade, 22-15, and then Lutheran, 42-35. Those Meade and Lutheran games being a little bit more recent here as they've picked up steam. But let's talk about their key players, starting with Montezuma, their senior athlete who converted from wide receiver to quarterback. He threw for 1,545 yards, 14 touchdowns to 16 picks, while rushing for 476 yards and 14 touchdowns. The offense revolves around him. The only real big consistent threat they have as a receiver is tight end Anderson Osborne, who has been very productive in his second straight season as the main, or not the main target, but, the starting tight end for them. But he has brought in 27 receptions for 473 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's going to get him involved a lot there. Like I said, lead receiver, also second in tackles, by the way, with 47, so important both ways there. But other than that, offensively, they're going to run the ball, and they have found some success running the ball between these two running backs in Broen Willis, the junior, and Anthony Scott, the senior. They've had some productive games while splitting carries here, both over 5+ yards a carry, and they give this offense a couple more looks by being able to carry that run game there. Now, Samaras can also run. Like I said, last year he played wide receiver, so he's definitely athletic, so that adds on just another running threat, while he is also a very solid passer. So, this is a team that may not have a prolific passing offense, but they can definitely do it comfortably. Now, the game plan for Holy Family, if they want to try to upset Thompson Valley, they got to control the tempo of this game. This defense has struggled mightily against playoff teams. They allowed 38 to Roosevelt, 63 to Pueblo East, 42 to Lutheran. Their only good performances were against Meade, allowing 22, and LP allowing 21. Still 3 scores, though. The offense needs to score on either every drive or the majority of their drives, at least 75% here. The defense, I don't know if they're good enough to stop a Thompson Valley team that is very tough up front and have a couple of skilled players as well. And so I think the best thing you could do is dominate the play clock there, keep the ball in your hands, and then you got to finish drives, you got to score. If they can make this a track meet, like I said, Thompson Valley has struggled against teams who can pass it, then, that gives them their best chance of winning. And then the obvious weakness for Holy Family is this defense. Maybe they'll be productive, get some tackles here, but like I said, they really struggled against other playoff teams. I don't think if you're Holy Family that you want to put this game in the hands of your defense. If anything, you got to put it in the hands of your offense. So there you go there. But let's go ahead and get to predictions here. I have everyone's brackets, including mine, and so I'll go ahead and just read off what everyone has predicted. No reasons for this week. We'll do that next week here. But I do have some predicted scores for each one. Let's go ahead and start with Gino. He's going with Thompson Valley winning in a close one, 23-13. Gideon, he is going to go with Thompson Valley winning this one and not a close one, 35-7. Cody has Thompson Valley winning in a little bit of a shootout, but still winning comfortably, 41-21. And then Phoenix has Thompson Valley winning a close one, 31-29. I have Thompson Valley winning 21-13 here. I do think this could be a close game. This Holy Family team has a lot of different options on offense. Now, They do run the ball a lot, though, and I do feel like this offense relies on establishing the run first. I don't think they're a team that could pass first and then establish everything later. And so that is a little bit of an issue, and so that's why I'm going with Thompson Valley in this one here. But, like I said, never say never. If Holy Family could make this a track meet, if they could control the tempo of the game, use up a lot of the clock, not give Thompson Valley enough time to get scores, and, this is a team, like I said, that has to run the ball. They don't really pass it like that. Then they do have a good chance of winning and upsetting this one. But we'll see. I will just say this, though. A 1 seed in 3A has only won the state championships 2 years in the last 10. One of those times was a couple years ago with that Roosevelt team with senior Tucker Peterson. I don't think Thompson Valley is built like that, but, that's one of those teams. And then the other one was Pueblo East almost 9 or 8 years ago. So it's very tough as a 1 seed to win it all here in 3A. And so we will see what happens with that. But let's go ahead and move on to the next matchup here. This team, or I guess the winner of that Thompson Valley and Holy Family game, will play the winner of this matchup, number 8 Discovery Canyon versus number 9 Pueblo East. Both of these teams have actually already met in the regular season, but let's go ahead and talk about Discovery Canyon. This team I got to watch on Saturday pretty recently here, and they went 8-2 on the season, beating Pueblo South on Saturday in a shootout, 49-40, which was electric there. They beat Pueblo East earlier on in the season, 32-14, Lewis Palmer 49-28, and then they lost to Pueblo Central. This was their very first game of the season that I got to watch, 41-34. That was probably a winnable game, and then they lose to Rampart, a 4A playoff team, 14-10 in another winnable game early on in that season. Now let's talk about key players, starting with their quarterback, the senior Hayden Jones, this lefty quarterback. Basically, the entire offense runs through him. He has accounted for over 1,500 yards of offense and 31 total touchdowns, both through the air and on the run. He has almost the same amount of attempts rushing as passing. I think he has one more attempt passing than rushing here. He's a guy that could do both. This Discovery Canyon team, they're going to run their little triple option, and he starts with it, and he has the option to run it a number of times, and he has broken some teams running the football, either in that system, in the option system, or he'll drop back and pass it, no one's open, he'll just go ahead and scramble. He is a tough quarterback to bring down, I will say that. If you allow him to dance, then he will, and then he'll throw it off platform. As a passer, they've taken some deep shots. Like, I feel like every game I go to, Hayden Jones throws like a 30-plus yard touchdown, and it's just going crazy. He has that accuracy, he has the arm power to do that, and he's just very dangerous. They can do a lot with Hayden Jones when he's on fire, and he's been on fire these last couple weeks here, as shown by that Pueblo South shootout. Now, he has a lot of other great skill players that he gets to rely on, including junior Devin Baker, and then seniors Riley Strain and Sam Kobayashi. This group of skill players have been super productive in this offense. Baker has turned into a little bit more of a bruiser out of this group, as he's the running back. He gets a lot of those carries between the tackles, and he's a tough player to bring down. And, he has some jukes and whatnot as well, a good productive player. Then you have Sam Kobayashi, who's a shifty utility player, someone that can make something happen in space. They play him at receiver. They'll give him handoffs here and there. He's definitely somebody who will get the ball a lot. And then there's Riley Strain, who in these last couple games has really emerged as a solid wideout one option. And he just makes big plays in tough one-on-one coverage against Harrison. I got to see a couple of those plays against Pueblo South. Got to see a couple as well. This group led by Hayden Jones is going to score points. I legitimately think they can score whenever they want to. So there you go there. Now on the defensive side, they're going to be led by the senior defensive lineman Jude Sahada. I feel like I'm saying that wrong, but excuse me if I'm saying it wrong either way. This defensive lineman has been a game wrecker, as he's second on the team with 57 tackles, but first in solo and tackles for loss. The defense is built around him, causing a lot of havoc. They have some good skill players as well. had a rough night against Pueblo South the other night. But they're a solid team. They got some athleticism all around, but I do think it starts with Jude Sahada causing a lot of havoc up front. Now, the game plan for Discovery Canyon, they need to put their offense in positions to win with the last possession. This isn't just the game plan versus Pueblo East, but moving forward in the playoffs, that is. This offense is explosive, and I think they can legitimately outshoot a number of teams in 3A, especially playoff teams. But defensively, they have struggled. Against Pueblo Central, they allowed 34. Lewis Palmer, 28. Pueblo South, 40. This defense isn't the worst. I think offensively, if they can control the pace and find ways to get the ball in the hands of their offense for the last possession of the half or the game, then they can win a lot of playoff games, including this one against Holy Family. Like I said, this offense, they're dangerous. They could find a lot of different ways to score, to move those chains, and I think if you're DCC, you got to focus on using up a lot of the clock if you are on offense and just finding opportunities to get your offense the ball back here. Now, in my opinion, the weakness of this team is the defense's consistency. There are times this defense plays lights out, especially against the run, but this defense has struggled to prevent shootouts, and they need more than just Suada to play at a high level here. And then even at the games I saw against Pueblo South, against Pueblo Central there, I felt like there were opportunities that they just missed on defense. They either missed a bunch of tackles or were out of position. You cannot have that. You need to be consistent in these playoffs, especially in 3A. Now, for Pueblo East, they went 8-2 on the season. I got to watch them against Pueblo South in that electric cannon game, which was a lot of fun here. But their only 2 losses on the season was to DCC 32-14, and then Northfield a couple weeks later, 28-27 in overtime. That's a team that made the playoffs in 4A, so that's a pretty quality opponent. They have had key wins against South. Like I said, I was at that game. They beat them 21-15. They got a last-second Justice Freeman rushing, not last second, but within the last minute, a rushing touchdown from Freeman to go ahead and win that game. They also got wins against Holy Family, 63-42, and then Pueblo Central, that was a big one, 41-36. That pretty much guaranteed them a spot in these playoffs. Now, key players for Pueblo East, their sophomore quarterback, Dolph Lewis. He's had a bit of a breakout season for him as he's thrown a lot more efficiently than last year for 1,038 yards, 13 touchdowns to 2 picks, with over 50% completion, which is very good. He's also rushed for 871 yards and 16 touchdowns. This year he has proven his potential with the big games against the fellow Pueblo teams here this season, and has shown that when he's hot, this team is dangerous. He will mostly look to run as he is dangerous there, but being a solid passer will go a long way in opening things up, especially with the weapons that he has. So this quarterback, I think he's just getting started, but he's definitely a dangerous playmaker for them if you're an opposing defense. Now, offensively, they have 2 other great playmakers, including running back Justice Freeman. This junior is a tough running back that pounds the rock, and he did that for 982 yards and 10 touchdowns this season. He will get you a yard if you need one, and he's a good player that they have over there to run the rock in between the tackles while allowing Lewis to, maybe take some more of those plays outside. So, they got an inside-outside duo with Lewis and Freeman. Now, at receiver / DB, you have the senior Isaiah Trujillo. He is one of the best receivers in the state as he caught for 611 yards and 11 touchdowns on only 37 receptions, also having 28 tackles and 2 picks. One-on-one, I think he's arguably the most difficult player to stop. If Lewis could get him the ball, he's going to make something happen. So there you go there. Now for Pueblo East, the game plan for them, they got to run the ball. They got to establish the run, and then don't allow the tempo of this game to get out of hand and turn this thing into a shootout. Well, I think they have the ability to outshoot playoff teams. Their best game plan is controlling the pace and pounding the rock, using up the clock. Everything else will open up from there, including the passing game, in my opinion, but you have to establish the run. I don't think this is another passing game that could exist without the run being established. Now, the weakness, in my opinion, is the passing game without the run being established, and then this run defense here. I already talked about the offense. Let's go ahead and talk about the defense. This team has consistently consistently struggle to stop the run. And in their 2 losses, they both allowed 200 plus rushing yards. They have to establish the run to solve that problem, because I don't know if this defense is going to get better against the run. And so the less opportunities opposing teams have to run out the clock, the better. You want to keep the ball in the hands of your offense, and then defensively, I mean, you got to do what you can there. So there you go there. This one should be very close here, but let me go ahead and talk about all our predictions, starting with my own. I currently have DCC winning a close one, 27-20 over Pueblo East. I do acknowledge that this one could definitely go either way, but I like DCC at home for now. Now, Gino, he is going with Pueblo East winning a shootout, 37-28, which is valid. I could definitely see that happening. Gideon has DCC winning by a point, 28-27 over Pueblo East. Cody has Pueblo East beating DCC 26-24 in another close one. And then Phoenix has DCC beating Pueblo East 38-31. So here on the podcast, we're all pretty much split between Pueblo East and Discovery Canyon. We feel like the second matchup between these two will definitely be closer, which is good, for sure, but that does make it pretty difficult to predict. All right, moving on, let's go ahead and talk about number 4, Palisade. They will be hosting number 13, Severance. Let's talk about Palisade. Key games this season, they went 8-2, only lost to Montrose and Durango, 35-14 to Montrose, 32-14 to Durango, but they didn't play the toughest schedule. I would say their biggest win was probably against Delta, 30-27, because that is a pretty solid team. I mean, even then, they lost a lot of players and whatnot and coaches, but I still like that win over Delta. They did beat Glenwood Springs as well, but it was kind of a long shot for Glenwood Springs to make it in. They needed to beat Palisade. They beat them pretty solidly there. Now, let's talk about key players, starting with the senior Easton Embry. He is one of their most explosive athletes, rushing for 734 yards and 11 touchdowns on only 46 carries. So almost scoring on every 5th carry there. But he's also a solid DB for the secondary. He gives his offense a lot of juice, though, with his speed. He is kind of one of their main guys there. And by the way, that's in an offense that is primarily going to run the ball. They don't really pass it over there, so Embry is one of like 5 or 6 players that gets the ball there on handoff, so there you go. Now, defensively, there's 2 players I really want to talk about, both seniors, including the big 6'4", 290-pound Vincent Johnston. He plays both ways, but on defense, he had 35 tackles, and then on offense, he paves the way for that rushing attack. The trenches for this Palisade team is anchored by him, and he helps them find a lot of success on both sides of the ball. Now, the other guy I want to talk about defensively is Keaton Everett. He's one of their most productive defensive players with 73 tackles, 19.5 tackles for loss, and 8 sacks. Him and Johnston wreak a lot of havoc up front for opposing offenses. Now, the game plan for Palisade, it's easy. Establish a dominating run game. They cannot go 3 and out. They can't afford that. They gotta go for long, extended drives, and if they score on one big play, that's fine too. But either way, this run game has to be on point. The blocking has to be right. You got to be aggressive. You got to find a way to get that done, because this isn't really a team that passes it. So if they go down early, then I don't think this is a team that could come back from down 2 or definitely not 3 scores, right? So got to establish the run game there, and it has to be dominating. Weaknesses. This team has not really played many qualified 3A playoff opponents. I think that opens the door, honestly, for them to get upset early. So it's vital that they establish a physical game plan here on both sides of the ball. Obviously, running the ball in offense, and then defensively, you got to go hit. You got to make a point there. And find a way to get it done. So we'll just have to see about that. This defense hasn't really been tested, so I don't want to say that it's weak, but it is definitely maybe a little unproven going against teams that are not as good as the teams they'll face in the playoffs, including this team in number 13, Severance, who makes it in with a losing record, but 4-6. They beat some solid teams. They beat Mountain View 22-0, Evergreen 26-24. They have played Thompson Valley and Roosevelt both pretty close there, only losing by 1 score to both. And they only lost to Riverdale Ridge, a 4A team, by 1 score. And then Windsor, one of the better 3A teams, by 2. So they've played a lot of close games. Got to remember, this is a new head coaching staff over there. They did lose Jeremiah Hoffman and his brother Jaden Hoffman, who was the quarterback for them. And so they've kind of, tuned some things over there. Now, talking about key players, I think Ian Pennick is going to be a big-time player for them. He's their senior running back. Missed a number of games early on in the season, but has come on strong the last 5 and seems to be healthy. He's one of the best running backs in the state when healthy, and he's just going to be tough to stop straight up. But then you also have other players like CJ Johnson. He's their second leading rusher, who went for 411 yards and 5 touchdowns, primarily in their first couple games in place of Pennick. If Pennick can't go, he should be serviceable there and do a very solid job for them like he did early on. They also have another senior in Caden Reyna who got some carries as well. He's another one that could help spell Pennick for a little bit and contribute as a runner. This offense for Severance looks like they're definitely more run focused and run heavy than before when they were a little bit more balanced, and so they're going to focus on running this football there. Reyna, by the way, is also the second lead tackler on this defense with 80 and leads the team with interceptions with 3. And then last but not least, I want to talk about the safety on defense. That's the senior Reed Green. He has 73 tackles, 3 interceptions, 2 pass deflections, and is a solid safety for them. So there you go. Now the game plan for Severance, they got to win in the trenches and keep Pennick healthy and fresh. This team is best when Pennick is fresh. He will rip off some long gains, but this team needs to win in the trenches and get others involved. Defensively, they've shown some serious potential to key in on runs and give their offense a chance by I just hope that they put together a complete 4 quarters, because in some of these close losses, it was just a tough go where they'd score and that would be the game winner there. And so this defense hopefully has learned from their mistakes, and they got to play a full 4 quarters as well as the offense keeping Pennick healthy and winning in the trenches. Now, there you go there. Now weaknesses, I would say for Severance, I would probably say it's the offensive depth and play calling versatility. They don't have as good a passing game as they did in the past couple years, and that does hurt their offense, who has struggled at times to score this season. The offense has had 5 games this season, so half their games, where they couldn't score more than twice, and to me that is a red flag. So, it's very important that this offense gets off to a fast start here and gets things going, and, not put too much pressure on Pennick, because he's going to make things happen, but if you could get other guys like a Johnson and Reyna involved, rotated in, and keep Pennick fresh, I think that's going to go a long way for them. And then defensively, like I said, they got to play well. There's a lot of pressure on them to play well because, I don't know if this offense could really pass their way out of it, and I don't know if they could come back from down 2 or 3 scores. And so defensively, you cannot afford to have miscommunications. So there you go there. Now, talking about predictions here, let's start with Gino. In this one, he has Palisade winning a close one, 15-12. Gideon has Palisade winning this one by a lot, 35-14 over Severance. Cody has Severance beating Palisade 21-10. And then Phoenix here has Palisade beating Severance by a lot, 42-6. I have Severance beating Palisade 14-13. I really feel like this is going to be a close game. Severance has played a lot of teams close. A lot of playoff teams who I think are better than Palisade in some ways and are just a little bit more of a complete team. And so I kind of expect Severance to keep this one close, but I also wouldn't be surprised if this one gets out of hand. New coaching staff that's getting to know this team, that does make me a little bit nervous. But at the end of the day, I just feel like the hardship that Severance has went through will pay off over Palisade's easier schedule and whatnot. So we'll see what happens. It'll be close. Severance has to also go to Palisade, which is a issue / problem of its own. but I like Severance in this one. I like their defense a little bit more. So there you go. Now, moving on, we're going to go ahead and go to number 5, Green Mountain versus number 12, Roosevelt. A rematch of the quarterfinals from last year here. They'll be meeting in round 1. Let's start with Green Mountain, who's at 5. They won 3-1, losing to Lutheran 21-19, Pomona 33-7, and Dakota Ridge 37-20. But other than that, winning a bunch of key games there, including a big win over Windsor at the beginning of the season. Albeit a little bit sloppy, it's still a pretty big win for them there. Now, talking about key players, let's start with their quarterback, Simon Lunsford, the senior. He has thrown for 1,853 yards, 20 touchdowns to 10 picks, and honestly, he's a gunslinger, but I do think he has the arm talent to spin the ball and stretch the defense thin, especially in the front seven. If he can pass efficiently and limit turnovers, this team can be dangerous, and I mean state championship winning dangerous. Now, the receivers he gets to throw to are pretty talented as well, very athletic, and seniors Dax Gomez and Demetrius Padilla. A lot of receivers get touches in this offense, a new offense implemented from this new head coach here that comes from Devlin, where they used to throw the ball a lot. And so even though a lot of receivers get touches, you could expect Gomez and Padilla to be the standout athletes who make big plays when you need them. Both of them are pretty dangerous in space, in my opinion, and depending on the matchup, if it's one-on-one, they're going to burn that one defender, and so they're going to attract a lot of attention, and if Lunsford is on it, then these two are going to be extremely dangerous, because I don't know if there's a secondary that is deep enough to battle both of these. Now, on top of that, they have a solid defense here, led by a linebacker core of all seniors, or mostly seniors, in Dominic Condrago, Hudson Burke, and Drennan Drowell. This senior linebacker core leads a defense that has seen its ups and downs this season, but is no doubt talented. This defense is probably not as good or deep as last year, but they got size, and these linebackers alone are going to challenge a lot of offenses. They got a lot of experience between these three here. Most of these players, or at least Burke and Drow, got some significant playing time last season. So that's definitely big time, and you can't take experience for granted. Now, they also have two younger players in Drew Contreras and Corbin Wade. These two juniors have risen up as contributors for this team, primarily off the edge. I'm pretty sure. I know Wade for sure. Contreras, I want to say, does as well, just like I believe his brother did in the past. But they have size to give opposing team fits. They will be tested in the playoffs, though. It will be important for both of them to get some pressure here and set that edge versus the run game as well. So there you go. Now, game plan for Green Mountain. On offense, I think you have to commit to the pass and throw the ball efficiently in order to get Gomez and Padilla going. The goal is to get the ball in their hands and move the rock. I think the running game will open up if the defense has to worry about the passing game. And then on defense, you got to find some consistency here and get your linebackers / edge rushers to apply pressure on the quarterback and then also stop the run. They have the talent to do so, but I do think it's just a consistency issue here, I should say. And that's honestly the weaknesses I have for Green Mountain: consistency and efficiency. This team has the potential to win state. I believe it, right? The last couple years, they've been dangerous. This year, especially, I think with a new head coach who has allowed them to pass the ball more, they are still dangerous again. But they have had their ups and downs here. They've had games where they haven't played as well as they could have defensively, and then offensively, way too many turnovers. I know in that Windsor game, there were a couple of turnovers there, and they were kind of lucky that Windsor also was pretty sloppy to start that season, and that's why they won it. And so going into the playoffs, they got to tune it up. They got to be consistent. They got to be efficient, And I think that starts with this passing game getting established and being dominant, and then this defense not making mental mistakes. Now, let's talk about the team they beat last year in the quarterfinals, number 12 Roosevelt, who they'll be facing off with. Some key games this season for Roosevelt. First off, they won 6-4. They lost to Windsor 34-10, Pomona 42-13, Thompson Valley in a close one though, 28-21, and then Mountain View 32-22. They did beat Northfield, a 4A playoff team, 28-20, and Holy Family 38-21, as well as Ponderosa, a 4A playoff team, 42-24. I feel like maybe they went through some injuries as well here. Now, let's talk about some key players here. Got a lot of players that always contribute for that Roosevelt team, but I think these three are the main ones to look out for, starting with Luke Vigil, the running back. They have leaned on him very heavily this season as their lead running back, as he has amassed 200 carries for 1,117 yards and 9 touchdowns. That does include 6 games this season where he went over 20 carries, and so his usage is a lot. They've been leaning on him a lot as the quarterback position has seemingly been in flux these last couple weeks, really this whole season here. And so expect him to get a pretty heavy workload here. But they do have a receiver that could help, relieve some of that. And that's Noah Lucero, their sophomore, who's their lead receiver with 33 receptions for over 600 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then he also plays defense. He has 21 tackles and 2 picks there. The 6'4" athlete is one of their more imposing players who is dangerous in one-on-one and has home run hitting ability, as in if you could get the ball in his hands, he will make plays. Now, Roosevelt has deployed both Jackson Craig and Josiah Ramirez at quarterback to throw to him all season. I don't know what the situation is there. It looks like both are getting chances to play quarterback, which even this late in the season is surprising for a team like Roosevelt. But, either way, he's going to help whatever quarterback starts and is the hot hand. So there you go. Now, defensively, you got to look out for Tristan Montanez. The 6'4", 220-pound senior defensive end is one of their most productive players with 47 tackles and 14.5 tackles for loss. The defense has been very up and down this season, but he should help lead that squad regardless, and he'll get his. Now, the game plan for Roosevelt, or at least the goal for them, they got to be able to sustain a balanced offensive attack. Villa will give them a lot of production, but they got to get Lucero and others involved, and they got to do it efficiently, which means the quarterback play has to be solid at least. You can't turn over the ball, especially in the playoffs, and make bad mental mistakes. Now, it's shaky, I feel, because I feel like when you have 2 quarterbacks playing consistently in every game, or almost every game this season, that's not the greatest look or vote of confidence either. So either way, they just got to play efficiently. That's the goal for them. And then on defense, they got to get consistent and be disciplined here. The weaknesses for this Roosevelt team is that they have no set quarterback, and then the defensive consistency of this team has been very all over the place this season. And so I don't know how good they're going to be going against a Green Mountain team who has also struggled with consistency here. But I think this will be a good game here. I think Green Mountain, they got some athletes over there that match up with Roosevelt's athletes, but I think what it'll really come down to is which offense could be the most efficient for them. Now, getting into predictions here for Gino, he is going to go ahead and he is going to go with Roosevelt over Green Mountain 20-15 for the upset. So still a close game, but he's going with Roosevelt in that one. Phoenix is also going to go with Roosevelt, winning that one 45-28. A little bit of a shootout, which I think is realistic. There's definitely a universe where that happens, and I don't know if either defense is going to be that good to stop that from being a big, or at least stop the chances from being big enough for where that's a very realistic situation that could happen. Now going to Cody, he's going to go with Green Mountain, beating Roosevelt 29-20 here, still in a relative close one. And then Gideon is going to go with Green Mountain, beating Roosevelt, just barely though, 22-21. In my predictions, I have Green Mountain beating Roosevelt 35-17, but I definitely have this one looking closer than what the score shows. I think maybe early on, especially in that first half, both teams are kind of feeling each other out. It's even keeled. Maybe both get to a fast start and score 14 to go, right? And then I think Green Mountain eventually pulls away here. I just like what they have offensively, potential-wise, at least. I think offensive potential-wise, they could score a lot. And then defensively, their linebackers are talented. If Roosevelt cannot pass the ball, those linebackers are going to have a very fun time hitting whatever poor running back is back there. And if it's Vijo taking all those hits, that is just not a winning game plan right there. So we'll see what happens. I think this is going to be a very close game. It honestly could go either way, as a lot of these 3A playoff games will probably go. So there you go there. Okay, now moving on to this next matchup. We have number 3 Pomona versus number 14 Conifer. Talking about Pomona first, they went 7-3 this last season, but only lost to 1-3A team in Thompson Valley 16-7. Their other losses were to 4A teams in Pueblo West 21-14 and Dakota Ridge, who they got blown out by. But, they got blowout wins other than that over Green Mountain, Roosevelt, and Severance, which is a pretty good group right there. Now, key players to look out for. They're pretty young altogether. All the players I'm going to talk about here are all juniors, starting with Emmett Munson. This athlete has done it all for Pomona. Throwing-wise, he's thrown for 525 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4 picks, though. He is their lead rusher with 931 yards and 9 touchdowns, and then is very productive, or as productive as you can be in a run-first offense, catching 12 receptions for 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. This Pomona team is going to run the ball first, but regardless of game plan, they're going to put the ball in his hands on offense here. The other guy that they're going to try to feed here on offense is Luis Santana, the junior. He's their other productive player on offense with 588 rushing yards for 9 rushing touchdowns, and then 7 receptions for 286 yards and 4 touchdowns. Him and Munson are going to get plenty of touches there. Like I said, they're going to run the ball a lot, but I do think they got some short, passes, some easy passes to get them the ball in space and get creative with that. And then on defense here, they bring in Connor Craver, their junior linebacker, who's their lead tackler with 70 tackles, which is pretty good. So there you go there. This Pomona team has been dominating 3A opponents and also played Pueblo West very close, which I think is a big green flag for Pomona, a red flag for Pueblo West. But let's go ahead and get into the game plan for Pomona. It's pretty simple. Run the ball successfully and play sound pass defense to force them to run the ball. If you make them one-dimensional, then I think they could be able to stop them or be able to stop the run here. Now, the biggest weakness I would say for Pomona is that they're just not the biggest team up front. They also just lack diverse play calling outside of running the ball. I don't think this is a team built to come back from being down early, as they have to get out to fast starts, as that was pretty obvious in the Thompson Valley game. So there you go there. But let's go ahead and talk about Conifer, who is also 7-3. Their only 3 losses coming against Stanley Lake, 29-21, Glenwood Springs, 39-14, and then Green Mountain. They got in a shootout with them, losing that one, though, 56-34. Now, this offense for Conifer has found some success here at quarterback. The senior Benson White has had kind of a breakout year, 2,079 passing yards, 27 passing touchdowns, and 3 picks. He also has ran for 514 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, they have some solid running backs who I talked about in the playoff, or not playoff preview, in their season preview, in seniors Karsten Wolonsky, and then I believe this is Carson Payer as well, who are big time. Wolonsky, though, has had a big season as expected, rushing for 1,150 yards for 6.7 yards a pop, also 9 rushing touchdowns. Payer, maybe not as big of an impact as I thought he would have, only rushing for 189 yards, but 5 touchdowns on 29 carries. Now, receiving-wise, they have a couple of solid receivers, all young, all junior receivers in Washer, Murphy, and Harrington, combining for 26 touchdowns, and then over 1,500, or at least close to 1,500 receiving yards. You can expect those players to get some touches, as his offense has been very, I would say, balanced, more balanced than they have usually been in the past. Now, defensively, they're pretty solid. They're going to be led by their senior, Isaiah Mortensen, who leads with 58 tackles, only 7 games played, though. But he did play in their last game against Evergreen, who they pretty much dominated. Or it felt like they dominated for most of that game. They won 28-16, but that was a good win for them. So there you go there. Let's go ahead and talk about the game plan for this Conifer team. I think offensively, you cannot get one-sided. You have to keep it balanced. I think they're going to be able to run the ball well. Wolonsky, he's a tough running back, but I think you do that by making them respect the pass here. So I wouldn't say run the ball to establish the pass. I think this is a team that's plenty talented enough to go ahead and pass it and open things up. Now, against this Pomona secondary, that's going to be rough. I'm not going to lie. So for them, I'm probably thinking that they're going for some, some short passes, some easy looks to just get some receivers into space, right? Worry about other players, and then let Wolonsky, eat just right up the middle, right? Let him run through those tackles and whatnot and do his thing there. Defensively, I do worry a little bit here. In their loss to Green Mountain, they allowed 56. Against Stanley Lake, who they lost to, they allowed 29. And then Glenwood Springs, who they lost to, they allowed 39 in those games. Not really doing well. I mean, outside of Green Mountain, I guess, who passes the ball. But even then, in that Green Mountain game, Green Mountain was over to run for over 200 yards. They also got 340 passing yards in that one. But in the Glenwood Springs game, they ran for 330 yards on them. In the Stanley Lake game, they ran for 305 yards on them. I don't love the defense, I'm not going to lie. They've had their struggles throughout this season, even in some of their wins. I mean, I'm looking at this Wheat Ridge game. They allowed 26 in that one, which is, that's a good team, but still, though, allowing that many, that could be an issue here. And so, more likely than not, they're going to find themselves in a shootout. So that's why I'm saying it's important that they get into a balanced rhythm here. They get this passing game going. I don't think you could bail on the passing game and just run the ball. They have to keep a balanced offense. If they could do that, then they have a chance here. It makes it tougher, right, for opposing defenses to kind of put you in a box of play calling and, limit what you could run over there. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be a tall task for sure, though. Looking at the brackets, though, Gino has Pomona winning 48-10 pretty easily there. Gideon has Pomona winning 42-0 over Conifer. Cody has Pomona winning 30-14, and then Phoenix has Pomona winning 49-13 here. And then I have Pomona winning 28-7. I think maybe it's a little bit closer here, but just honestly, I'm very nervous about how this Conifer team matches up with Pomona. Like I said, they like to pass it, but this Pomona secondary might be the best one in all of 3A. And so that is a tough go for them. And then defensively, I think, once they know that they got the back end locked down, this team can't beat them through the air, then they're going to key in on the run. And that's just not a great recipe for Conifer, whose defense has struggled to stop teams, especially running teams as well, allowing 300 yards and 200 yards in their losses. So this Pomona team is going to be able to run the ball. They're one of the best in the state at running the ball. I think that's going to be an issue, so that's why I'm going with Pomona winning this one 28-7. I don't think it's going to be a gigantic blowout. I think Conifer is going to put together some nice drives, but it's going to come down to finishing those drives and keeping a balanced attack there. I don't think you can bail on either one, the pass or the run, too early. You got to stay efficient is what I'm saying here. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about this next matchup, little battle up north here. We got number 6 Windsor versus number 11 Mountain View. Windsor going into this one 9-1 on a 9-game hot streak here after losing to Green Mountain 19-13. They have beat some very good teams, including Severance 21-7, Roosevelt 34-10, Meade 13-7 in a close one, and now they pull Mountain View. Some things to note about Windsor here. They will be without their starting quarterback, Kyle Phelps, as he is out for the season here, so that's going to be tough. They will be going to their sophomore quarterback here in James Beats. So a little bit of a preview into the future here. The 6', 200-pound sophomore in the last couple games. Not too much really going for him. I mean, a very light production so far. 71 passing yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick, 32 rushing yards here. Against Meade, only threw 5 passes, and they still won in that game. Did throw 1 interception, though. So we'll see what he is made of going into this one. But most likely, Windsor's going to pound this rock and run the ball here. They're going to do it with their group of 3, starting with the senior Trip Thomas on the year, ran for 868 yards, 17 touchdowns. That's 9.1 yards a pop here. This offensive line also putting in work for them. They also have the senior Tegan Cole, who got some carries as well, 640 yards and 8 touchdowns. And then they have the junior, and I'm about to butcher this name, I apologize ahead of time, Adrian season, I want to say. 533 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns. Something to note about all their running backs here, all the players that got rushes or the significant amount of those rushes, with these 3 players, all of them are averaging over 7 yards a carry. So that's absolutely big time there. Receiving wise, like I said, not too much going on here. They're definitely running the ball a lot more. Now, defensively, this is a tough unit led by the senior linebacker Landon Sefcovic here. The 6'3", 215-pound linebacker has 53 tackles on the season, only third to 2 other players in Braden Fernandez, 6 foot 210 middle linebacker who has 77 tackles and 12 tackles for loss, and then junior Isaiah Kronk, who is listed as one of their outside linebackers as well. Defensively, this is a group with some pretty good size here. You got some players like junior John Stevens, who's 6'5", 260 at defensive tackle. You also have other players like a Robert Taylor, who's a big body up front there, and Ian Van Horn, who are all big players. I mean, this Windsor team has a lot of size, just being honest. There's a reason why they've been able to run the ball well. Even with the injuries, they lost to Kyle Phelps, they lost Samuel Cooper here, which are definitely big losses, but the size of this line on both sides of the ball is definitely a game changer here. There's not many offenses or defenses in the state that could stop that here. And just listing off, players, you already have those that I mentioned right there, but that doesn't even include Wesley Prinz, who is 6'3", 284 pounds, as well as a Gavin Shipp, who's 6'2", 265 at center too, by the way. Caden Myers, who's only a freshman here, may not even play, but he's 6'4", 265. I mean, this team, they just have a lot of size. They're going to be difficult to handle up front for a lot of teams who just don't have that depth. This Windsor team has that depth, and they have the skill players to win. Now, game plan for Windsor, I think the biggest thing is to take the pressure off your quarterback and run the football here. This Windsor team has, in the last couple years compared to the past, have come a little bit closer to running a more balanced offense here, but I think they go back to their bread and butter, pound the rock, hit somebody on the line. They're bigger than the other team here, than most teams really in the playoffs, not just Mountain View, but they got a lot more size. They just got to lean on them here and run the ball. Defensively, get a good pass rusher. They got to get some pressure on the quarterback. This is a team that's going to throw it here, and I think they'll be just fine. They have enough athletes on the back end where I'm really not worried about them. They have a pretty solid secondary. I mean, this defense altogether is pretty good here, but it's easy to be a good defense when you have a huge front seven here that's going to find a lot of ways to, get it done and stop the run here. And so I think this Windsor team is in a great spot. It's pretty simple. Pound the rock, play disciplined defense, don't make mental mistakes. Now, for Mountain View, let's talk about them. 6-4, first time they made the playoffs in a really long time here. Their early losses were to Loveland 15-12, Thompson Valley 27-7, Pomona 42-7, and Severance 22-0. But they have beat teams like Roosevelt 32-22, which is big time. They've beat Wellington, which is a solid team. Granted, they didn't have Tanner Gray, 20-17, a solid 2A team there. So this Mountain View team is in the playoffs for a reason, and I believe it starts with their quarterback, the junior for them, Cam Frost, who has passed for 1,181 yards, 12 touchdowns to 6 picks. He spreads the ball out pretty well. Got 4 players with over 200 yards here in senior Strom, senior Lawson, senior Tyson Mayers-Benz, who's their tight end and lead receiving touchdown leader with 5 touchdowns, and then the senior Amons, who has 4 receiving touchdowns. So this is definitely an offense that has relied on passing the ball. It's not that they can't run it here, but I do feel like they find a little bit more success passing it. The senior running back for them, Keegan Amons, he is also their leading rusher, obviously, 583 yards and 3 touchdowns, only 4.9 yards a pop there, though. You also have other players like Shani and Mendoza contributing just over 250 yards each year. But like I said, this is a team that's probably going to want to throw it more than anything. Defensively, they have some solid players, starting with their junior linebacker, Barrett Plews here. 109 total tackles on the season. That almost leads the state there. You also have Tyson Mears-Benz playing both ways. The 6'3", 215-pound tight end and defensive end is super productive for them. Their third leading tackler with 73 tackles and 15 tackles for loss there. So there you go there. I think the big game plan for Mountain View is that you probably want this to be more of a shootout than anything, so you gotta find some easy looks for your passing attack early on and then build on that. If you could pass it first and then open up the run after, that'll be big time. This Mountain View team isn't exactly huge up front. I mean, they have some solid size here. Roman Kenny, Spencer Baranovich, who's definitely worth noting on defense as well. Jacob Wagner, as well as Suvam Singh the Curry. But the depth of this line, both offensive and defensive line, is definitely concerning. And that's one of their biggest weakness. I think that's why they haven't been able to establish the run as much as they want. And then defensively, they've struggled with stopping the run as well against teams like Thompson Valley, Pomona, and Severance, all scoring 3 scores on them, right? Those are run-first teams there. And Loveland as well, who's a run-first team. So with that being said, I don't have a lot of confidence in this defense stopping the run here. And so offensively, you got to take off some of that pressure. And I think you just got to let it fly. Throw the ball here. Be efficient, get some easy looks early on, build on that. But, I mean, for Mountain View, you got to get the ball out quick. You got to get into the hands of your playmakers and get them into space. Keep that defense on their toes. It is going to be tough. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be tough, but we'll see. Gino has his predictions here. Let's go to predictions, by the way. Gino's prediction here is that he has Windsor winning kind of a closer one, 23-14. Gideon has Windsor winning a really close one, 25-24 over Mountain View. Cody has Windsor winning 20-13 over Mountain View, and Phoenix has Windsor winning 42-7. The only one, I believe, out of all of us to not have it super close. Next to me as well, I have Windsor winning this one 28-10. I'm not gonna lie, I'm just looking at this here. Windsor does not have their starting quarterback, but they have plenty of athletes over there. They have a quarterback, in a sophomore who has had a couple, games and whatnot. It's not like they're thrusting him into the starting spot just in time for playoffs. He's had some experience this season. I still think you want to take the pressure off of him, but this Windsor front seven on defense and then the offensive line on offense, they're going to be dominant, I think. I don't really see too many players on this Mountain View team giving them too much trouble, and even then, a lot of those players are playing both ways for Mountain View, and I think that is an issue. The depth of Windsor in general, I think, is going to be an issue, so I think Windsor eventually pulls away here, and they win a relatively solid game, 28-10. Now, that quarterback situation is probably going to be a problem later on in these playoffs, but for now, I got Windsor beating Mountain View 28-10. Now moving on, we have a very good matchup here between number 7 Pueblo Central and number 10 Lutheran at Dutch Clark Stadium. I feel like it's been a minute since there's been a playoff game there in the first round at home, that is. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Pueblo Central 8-2 on the season here. Only 2 losses were to Moore Park, which is a team out in California, a pretty good team. They're 8-3. Moore Park, that is, on the season, and I believe currently they are going to go to the playoffs or about to be in the playoffs. So there you go. That's a solid team. And then they lost to Pueblo East in a shootout, 41-36, which is definitely a little surprising there. This is a team that I got to see, though, live in one of their key games against Discovery Canyon. I got to watch them win a shootout, 41-34. That was a gutsy win for them, but they found a way to get it done. Then other than that, they haven't had really too many crazy, difficult games. You had Eden, Alamosa, who they took care of, both 2A teams, though. County was a big win, though, 51-0, and then Sierra Coronado aren't that good. The East game is a tough loss, though, for sure. But let's go ahead and talk about this Pueblo Central team. This is a team that's definitely going to pound the rock here, and for good reasons, which I'll talk about here in a minute. It starts with their star running back, Amari Brown, who on the season ran for 1,667 yards and 20 touchdowns. You also have the senior quarterback, Gennaro Pino, who passed for a solid 657 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick, but also is a solid enough athlete, rushing for 823 yards and 10 touchdowns. And then I do want to mention these other 2 seniors as well, in Joseph Castro and Aiden Hassel here. Castro running for 469 yards and 4 touchdowns. Hasselt running for 452 and 7 touchdowns. I believe Amari Brown missed 2 games here, so they're able to hop in and get it done. And so this team, they're going to run the ball here, and for good reason. I think you got to look at their 2 big offensive linemen, and by big, I mean huge, in Zion and Simeon Salvo, both playing both ways. Both players over 6'2" and over 300 pounds, but aggressive, nasty. They have paved the way for a very tough Pueblo Central offense and defense here. Defensively for them, I do think just one person I want to shout out outside of the Salvo brothers is Ernest Matson, their senior cornerback, who leads with 4 interceptions on the season. The 6'1", 180-pound corner has had a very good season for them. On the year, Matson has 15 total tackles. I mean, it's pretty spread out amongst this team in general, but this Pueblo Central team has been able to dominate the trenches with those 2 standout linemen in the Salvo brothers, who are big time, both offensively and defensively. They cause a lot of havoc, and that's why they've been able to run the ball so efficiently. And I mean, this is a pretty solid system where you don't always know who's going to get the ball. Early on, they're going to feed Amari Brown. I think that's always pretty obvious, but they're going to get Apino involved. They're going to get some of those other guys involved as well here and get Brown, some rest and get him some relief there. And you have a couple athletes who could hop in and do a solid enough job, in my opinion. So there you go there. I think the game plan for Pueblo Central is pretty easy. Play physical football on both sides of the ball. On offense, you're going to run the ball. You know that. You got to run hard and you got to block hard. That's all it is. On defense here, I think the big thing is trying to get pressure. The Salvo brothers, I mean, they're going to be used a lot, right? But if you could get pressure from other areas, that's big time. And then, this corner, I mean, this secondary is pretty athletic as well here. So maybe force some interceptions, some turnovers, and then run down this clock. If you play physical football, use this clock up. I think they'll be just fine here, but ideally you don't want to get into a shootout if you're Pueblo Central. If you're Pueblo Central, you want to dominate the time of possession here with the ball, and you got to score. You got to score on turnovers for sure, which I think this defense is capable of forcing. And yeah, we'll just have to see what happens there. And they could pass it a little bit against Discovery Canyon. I believe I saw Pino pass it a little bit. He had some solid plays in that game, but most of it was on the ground is what I should say there. So there you go. But that's Pueblo Central. They're going to run the ball with Amari Brown here, and they're going to play physical football. I think that's what they got to do if they want to win. Now you have Lutheran here. They went 9-1 on the season, only losing to Pueblo West 47-21. Other than that, I mean, they beat a very good Cooper team out of Texas 43-26 there, right at the beginning of the season. Now, that is a team that has struggled as the years went on. But other than that, they have some big wins here against Green Mountain, 21-19, Holy Family, 42-35. Close ones, though. Res Christian, which is a solid 2A team, did make the playoffs, though. They blew them out rightfully, 41-0. And then just kind of a easier schedule as well, just like Pueblo Central here. Now, this is a team that has been to state the last 2 years. It's not the same team that has been to state the last 2 years, but they got players all over here, starting with their star senior running back Sawyer Wald, who has had an excellent season running for 1,493 yards and 21 touchdowns, 9.3 yards a carry, which is big time. You also have, a backup running back as well in sophomore Evan Holdridge, who has only had 22 carries, but has went for 145 yards and 3 touchdowns. Last season, we got to see him take on a bigger role as Wald got hurt, and I think that's definitely somebody that can do the same. Now, if you know Lutheran, you know they're going to pass the ball. This year hasn't been as prolific passing-wise, as they do have a new quarterback in junior Eli Abramson, who has hopped in here and has done a solid job. Passed for 1,725 yards, 23 touchdowns to 12 picks. Also has 107 yards and a touchdown there. there's a couple big time receivers, but the big three receivers that you got to look out for Lutheran is number one, Jack Wislowski, 6'3", 200 pounds. Did think that he could maybe play a little bit of quarterback at some point, but he's been electric. He's been their star receiver, their leading receiver for them this season. And last year in the playoffs, he made some big plays to get them to state. On the year, only 30 receptions, but 451 yards and 7 touchdowns there. You also have Jake Vandershow, I want to say, a senior wide receiver for them, 6'1". He's had a solid year, catching for 244 yards and 5 touchdowns, only 14 receptions though. A lot of that damage was done against Fort Morgan, where he caught 7 for 173 and 3 touchdowns in that big time game. So still got to look out for him. And then you have the junior Deacon Downing, who I feel like you got to look out for because when given the ball, he has made some big plays. 13 receptions for 214 yards and 4 touchdowns here. Definitely somebody you got to look out for. Now, this Lutheran offensive line coming back is big. Again, I don't think that is surprising to anybody. Just to list off a couple players here, you have Caleb Abramson, who's 6'2", 250. That's their center right there. You have Dane McGuckin, guard defensive end, 6', 240. You have Thomas Green, another guard for them, 6'4", 310. You have Garrett Schmidt, 6'4", 260. You have Alex Zachem, the Harvard commit, 6'8", 285 here. This is an offensive line with a lot of size, and defensive line as well. They got some size, but that has always been how Lutheran has ran. They've always been super deep here. Now, defensively, they've had a solid year. Wislowski leads them with 3 interceptions, playing, I believe, safety for them back there. But a player you got to look out for is the junior linebacker, Xavier Villarreal. Hopefully I'm saying that right, but the junior linebacker, 6'1", 200 pounds, leads in tackles with 82 tackles, also 11 tackles for loss, which he is the leader in. You have McGuckin right behind him, though, with 10 tackles for loss as well. And then you have Evan Holdridge putting in a lot of work on defense this season. The 5'10", 180-pound linebacker, 47 tackles on the year. This is a pretty solid defense for them. Now, I will say this. Against Green Mountain, they allowed 19, Holy Family 35, but this is a defense that has some talent, has some size here. They're not going to get tired out too easily. Now, for Lutheran, I think the big thing is that you need to get your passing game going. You know that Sawyer Wald is going to tear it up, but if Eli Abramson could play a clean game, be productive as well, not like protecting him. I'm not saying that. He has to contribute. I think at least 200 passing yards or at least 150 plus passing yards would be big time enough here. But if he can give you that, then that'll be huge. But this is an offense that, has struggled at times being efficient. I would say the passing game has struggled at times being efficient. Against Holy Family, Abramson's 14 of 21, 173 yards, 1 touchdown, but 1 pick there. Luckily, Wald rushed for 355 yards and 5 touchdowns in that game. So there you go there. Against Green Mountain, 187 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks again. Once again, Wald goes for almost 200 rushing yards in that one. So there's that. And then against Pueblo West, a game that they lost, but I thought realistically maybe they matched up well. He struggled in that one, 227 yards, 38% completion percentage, 4 picks, only 1 touchdown. Wald still went for 109 yards, but not the greatest passing game there by Abramson. So with that being said, he just needs to take care of the ball. I think he's going to be productive, get close to 180 to 220 passing yards. I think that's pretty efficient there. That's a good game for him there. And then if he could throw no picks, that's huge for Lutheran. I know, during the regular season, they've kind of been letting him figure things out. That's not bad at all. But in the playoffs, you got to play cleaner football. So for Lutheran, got to limit the turnovers there and, have a balanced offensive attack. Now, their biggest weakness might just be their defense here. They haven't had the best games, allowing 47 to West, 19 to Green Mountain, 35 to Holy Family. Now, 2 of those 3 games, they still won. Also to Cooper, allowing 26. So 3 out of those 4 games, you still won, but your defense cannot be allowing 4 scores or at least 3 scores a game. That's just not the most reliable there. They got to key in on the run a little bit more here. I think that is possibly, that is one of the biggest things that they got to do. Against Holy Family, they allowed almost 200 yards and also 265 passing yards too, which is kind of a lot there. Against Green Mountain, who, like I said, they did beat, still allowed 158 rushing yards against them and 185 passing yards. So defensively, they got to shore up just a little bit. If they can, I think this team will be in a good spot. Limit the turnovers, right? Defensively, play a good enough game, make enough stops, at least 2 or 3. This is a winnable game for them. But let's go ahead and get into the prediction side of things. Gino is going to go ahead and pick Lutheran to win this one 33-24 over Pueblo Central, which would be a tough win for them, but I could see that. Phoenix has Lutheran beating Pueblo Central in a shootout, 49-45. That could definitely happen. Both defenses have struggled at times here, more so Lutherans than Centrals, I would say. But, both have shown vulnerabilities at times throughout this season. Cody has Lutheran beating Central 21-20, and then Gideon has Lutheran beating Pueblo Central in a close one, 14-10. I'm also going with Lutheran over Central 30-10. I realize we're all picking the upset here, but this Lutheran team, they are a little bit more balanced on offense than Central. Even on a bad day, they're gonna get some passing yards, and that's gonna open up that rushing game a lot here, because this defense is gonna have to be focusing a lot on a lot of different things. The best bet for Central is to make a statement early on here and continue to play physical football, control the pace of this game. But this Lutheran team, you can't count them out. They could come back from 2 scores. We've seen it happen before here. They're a gritty group, well coached. It's going to come down to what happens on Saturday, so we'll just have to see what happens there. Alrighty, now the last matchup that I'm going to talk about here, it's a good one. We got number 2 Meade versus number 15 Pueblo South. Both of these teams actually played much earlier on in the season in game 1. But let's go ahead and hop into it. Let's talk about Meade here, who going into this game, they are 8-1. Their one loss came to Windsor just a couple weeks ago, but they beat the likes of Holy Family 22-15, Frederick 16-14, which is a 4A playoff team, and Pueblo South, like I said earlier on in the season, 33-14. Now, key players for the squad, let's go ahead and start with their senior quarterback, Christian Heiner. He's been very efficient this season, throwing for 805 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, only 1 pick, while rushing for 210 yards and 4 touchdowns with a 60% completion percentage, which is pretty good. He brings a lot of stability to this offense, being a multi-year varsity starter, and that experience will be needed in these playoffs. He reminds me a lot of the quarterback that they had when they went to state just a couple years ago. Very similar roles there. Now, Meade is a team that's going to pound the rock. They're going to run the ball. And they have 2 sophomore running backs, and Noah Chapela and Ethan Elmore, who have split carries all season long and have carried the load of a tough Meade team here. Look for this backfield to produce here. They have pretty similar numbers, and both of them have found success. Now, I will say this, Ryan St. Aubin, he is a junior running back who started for them earlier on in the year, but it appears he has been injured. I'm not sure if that is going to last for the whole season, but if he comes back, that does add another back to add to this stable. So, there you go there. This backfield for Meade is going to put in work for the offense. Now, I just want to go ahead and shout out a number of different players here. We have Justin Spinlove, Griffin Cradle-Chevelle, Grant Gordon, Caleb Go, Hagan Williams, just to name a few. Those are some big-time players to keep an eye out on the offensive and defensive line, which is massive here. Spinlove is 6'2", 225 at defensive end. Cradle-Chevelle, 6'3", 230 at defensive end. Grant Gordon playing both offensive line and defensive line, I want to say, as well, 6'4", 280. You have Caleb Go, who has played the last couple games here. He's 6'7", 390 as a senior. And then you have Hagan Williams, who has been very productive for them, 6'2", 210 here. The size of this Meade offensive and defensive line is massive. This is just naming a few players, but they're extremely deep. And this team is built to play smash mouth football. You're not going to find many other teams with the size and the strength that this team will have up front. And that has caused an issue for a lot of teams so far. Now let's talk about the game plan for Meade, not only in this game, but moving forward. But if they want to make a deep run, they got to dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Like I said, I just talked about them having a lot of size up front. They cannot allow other teams to out-physical them. They got to be aggressive. They got to play with some fury and some edge in every single down and wear down opposing teams, because eventually that's going to get to them. I think if they do that, then they're going to win a lot of games here. Now, the weakness, in my opinion, of this team is probably the offensive firepower. In my opinion, this team is built to slug it out in the trenches, but I don't know if they are exactly a squad that can afford to get into a shootout or go down pretty early on here. Now, defensively, I think they can be sound, and they're going to need to in order to keep that offense out of situations where the pressure is on for them to score. And so, for me, you really just cannot afford to go down early or find yourself into a shootout. Got to control the pace of the game. You got to hit up front, and I think they will be just fine from there. Now, let's talk about number 15, Pueblo South. Got to watch them last Saturday here. 6-4 on the season. They lost to Meade 33-14. Pueblo East in a tough one. That's a game that I got to watch 21-15 there. Lewis Palmer 28-26, and then I saw them lose against Discovery Canyon 49-40 in a shootout. Now, honestly, they don't have a lot of super quality wins. Maybe their best one was Falcon 35-21, or maybe even Pueblo County 35-28 here. But we'll talk about that more here in a minute. Let's talk about their key players. They're led by a number of juniors on the offensive side of the ball, starting with their quarterback, Caden Herrera, who has passed for 2,278 yards, 29 touchdowns to 8 picks, as one of the most productive passers in the entire state. While I do think he is raw at times, he has the talent to go off on any team. In the playoffs, though, he needs to lock in, but he is a wild card to look out for sure. I do think there are times where he holds on to the ball too long or just does not make the right decision. In these playoffs, he has to get the ball out. He has to be sharp moving forward. He also has junior running back Chase Hurley, who has rushed for 916 yards and 11 touchdowns. And I think he's super talented and can be lightning in the bottle, but this South offensive line has definitely struggled at times this season to spring him loose. So just keep an eye out on him. If he gets, a little crease, he could get out there and make something happen. He's also their leading tackler, by the way, on defense. Then they also have Jake Pisciata, the junior wide receiver, is their lead receiver with 924 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. I think he's the focal point of this offense, as he's somebody who's a threat to score or make a highlight catch, whatever. You also have other solid receivers in Naaman Robinson and Landon Cordova, who give South an arsenal of weapons to choose from and deploy when needed. But that does depend on Herrera playing a very solid and clean game. Now, defensively, you got to look out for Frankie Pacheco, the senior defensive lineman who leads the South defense that has struggled at times throughout the year. He has had an excellent senior year so far, though, and his contributions on the defense have been big time here. This defense needs him to wreak havoc consistently, but other people got to step up here moving forward. Now, the game plan for Pueblo South, in my opinion, is to pass the ball efficiently and make teams take players out of the box to defend the pass. This team can't score with the best of them, but they have struggled at times to run the ball, and so I think they need to pass it efficiently and open up those running lanes. It may not be a bad thing to put the game in their passing offense's hands here, in my opinion, because really, when they get going, then they are really tough to stop, and I think their best situation, best chance to win in the playoffs is by shootout. Now, weaknesses, in my opinion, is his defense. They've struggled to stop playoff offenses, and on top of that, they are not the biggest team outside of Pacheco. I think there's definitely a lack of size, and so that does contribute to the run game not being as good at times versus teams like, DCC and Pueblo East, who does have a little bit more size than them. And so, with that being said, I really feel like the passing offense needs to take over. They got to do their job here, and they got to force opposing defenses to respect their game, because I'm not super confident in this defense in getting a stop when you need it, and then I just don't know if they could run the ball well against teams who are super disciplined against the run and have a little bit more size, especially a team like Meade, who has a stable of big boys over there. So there you go. Now, going to our predictions here. Let's start with Gino. He's going to go with Meade winning 25-18 in a close one, moving on to the second round. Gideon is going to go with Meade winning 35-14 over South, moving on to the second round. Cody has Meade winning 28-18 over Pueblo South, and then Phoenix has Meade winning 20-12. I have Meade winning 35-14. I just think, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit closer, than before, but I just think right now this Meade team just has a lot of size up front that this South team is going to struggle with. They struggled with the first time, and I think that showed with the lack of offensive production there. And so I trust Meade's front seven and offensive line to take care of business. And by the way, this is a team that did not have Caleb Go in that first game. So adding in another big body at 6'7", almost 400 pounds, that is going to be a game changer for sure, and it's going to be tough for South to win it. Like I said, for South, they got to make this a track meet. They got to try to outshoot them, but it is a tall order to ask out of them. So there you go there. Most of us, I think all of us, have Meade beating Pueblo South in the next round. But that will do for these playoff previews. We'll see what happens, and I'll catch you next week.
Obviously, you want a trainer who can make you stronger and faster with the work you put in. But what about a trainer who can help you rehab and recover like the pros? Look no further than Junkyard Training, that not only offers specific strength and speed training, but also offers a plethora of recovery and rehab techniques like cryo, cupping, recovery boots, and so much more. Learn more today by visiting junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594. Once again, visit junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594 and get started today.
What is good, y'all? This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and it is time to recap the first round of the 2024 4A Boys Tackle Football Playoffs. We obviously had a ton of snow this past week, so that pushed a lot of the games back to Sunday and Monday. We had a lot of exciting matchups and a couple of upsets, so let's not waste any more time and jump right into our first game here, where we had Frederick take down Northfield 32-14. It was the run game, surprisingly, for Frederick that got it done in this game. Gavin Ishmael ran for 73 yards on 14 carries for a touchdown. Sonny Del Pizzo ran for 36 yards and a touchdown. And then Tristan Dean had 91 yards and 2 touchdowns on 15 carries. Very surprising to see that Frederick was leaning on the run in this game, considering they are one of the most pass-heavy offenses in the entire state. Now let's take a look at these defensive stats for Frederick. Looks like Josiah Martinez had the lone sack here. And then Taven Haggerty and Colt Hogue both had 1 tackle for loss each. We don't have any stats for Northfield, unfortunately, but with that win, Frederick will be moving on to face 2-seeded Montrose in the next round. And that should be a great game with both of those teams having completely different offensive philosophies. That was our one and only Friday game. So looking at these Saturday games, we have 10-seeded Monarch beat down 23-seeded Bear Creek 28-7. No stats for Bear Creek here, but looking at Monarch, looks like Riley Montemayor had a solid game. He went 10 for 16 for 138 yards and a touchdown. And then rushing the ball, he had 24 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on 6 carries. The leading receiver here for Monarch was Archie John. He had 66 yards and a receiving touchdown on 4 receptions. Defensively for Monarch, Antonio Beal and Wyatt Carlucci both had 11 tackles, and that led the team. And then Ty Watson had a sack and 2 tackles for loss, and Sean Williams also had a sack. They weren't done there, though, as Tyler Tharp, Chase Gray, Wyatt Carlucci, and Levi Carlucci, all 4 of those players had 1 interception each. So definitely a huge game defensively here for Monarch to get this win. And they will be moving on to face a very tough Mesa Ridge squad in the next round here. In our last of the Saturday games, folks, 14-seeded Riverdale Ridge fell to 19-seeded Golden 17-14. It was the sophomore QB Thatcher Matthews who led the way here for Golden in this win. He had 200 yards rushing and a touchdown on 18 carries. And then passing the ball, he didn't have his best game. He went 9 for 19 for 92 yards and a touchdown and no interceptions. The leading receiver was Jack Dixon with 6 receptions for 70 yards. This was a big game defensively for Golden. Trevin Edwards had 10 tackles, and that led the team. Wyatt Holtman had a sack. Bracken McDougal had an interception on defense as well as a receiving touchdown on offense. Gabriel Reese had an interception, and then Liam Leffert also had an interception here for Golden in this win here. So it looks like that secondary completely locked down Riverdale Ridge's heavy pass attack, and that's what ultimately got Golden the win here in this slugfest. Golden will be moving on to face 3-seeded Pueblo West in the next round of the playoffs. Next here, in a game that pretty much all of us thought was going to be a close one, Loveland came out and absolutely blew out Doherty on the road. The final in that one was Loveland 45, Doherty 14. So Loveland making their name known here early on in the playoffs with that blowout win. They will be moving on to face number 1 seeded Dakota Ridge in the second round here. We didn't get any stats in that Loveland-Doherty game, so that takes us to our next one, where 13-seeded Rampart got the big-time win over Grand Junction Central 40-7. No stats here for Grand Junction Central, but for Rampart, Damian Deach had a solid game. He went 10 for 19 for 186 yards, 1 touchdown, and no interceptions. Camden Bruns was the leading charge offensively here, though. He finished with 108 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on 14 carries. And then Brody Wieben also had a rushing touchdown. The leading receiver was Carter Leffler with 6 receptions for 123 yards and a touchdown. Defensively for Rampart, they had 15 tackles for loss as a team. 4 of those went to Justice Derrickson. 3 of those went to Braden Worth, who also had a ridiculous 20 tackles in this game. That obviously led the team. Nathan Bolliston also had 2 tackles for loss. And then Camden Bruns with a monstrous game on offense and defense. He finished with 13 tackles and 2 tackles for loss in this game. Braden Worth had 2 sacks, and then Justice Derrickson had 1.5 sacks in this win. So Rampart, we already knew they were going to bring the heat on defense, but it looks like offensively they also put everything together to move on to the next round. They will be facing 4-seeded Palmer Ridge, and that is a familiar foe for Rampart. Next up here, 9-seeded Grand Junction won a shootout over 24-seeded Longmont, 59-29. No stats for Longmont, unfortunately, but for Grand Junction, it looks like this was Will Applegate's best game throwing the ball all season long. He went 10 for 12 for 264 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. That is good for a 163 rating. He wasn't done there, though, as rushing the ball, he had 71 rush yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on 6 carries. Matthias Martinez and Noah Watkins both had 1 rushing touchdown each as well. And then for receivers, Mason Anderson had 3 receptions and 3 receiving touchdowns for 133 yards. So him and Will Applegate were connecting like no other in this win. Defensively, though, it looks like Colton Music and Isaac Martinez both had an interception. And Grand Junction will be moving on to face 8-seeded Ponderosa in the next round, and that is definitely going to be a great game. 12-seeded Vista Ridge shut down a very high-powered Highlands Ranch offense on their way to a 35-8 win. We don't have any stats for Highlands Ranch, unfortunately, but it looks like Vista Ridge pounded the ball on their way to this win. Gabriel McFarland finished with 56 rush yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on only 4 carries. The QB Zayden Stevens went 6 for 8 for 96 yards with a touchdown and an interception. The leading receiver was Aiden Vandeman with 76 receiving yards, a touchdown on 2 receptions. Defensively for Vista Ridge, Wesley Coddington had a huge game. He finished with a team-leading 10 tackles, and then he also had a forced fumble and a sack. Lennon Lewis also had a sack, and Gabe Herman had 10 tackles. Also defensively, Jameer Ford had a pick 6, and Aiden Smith recovered a fumble, and he took that one in for the touchdown. Vista Ridge will be moving on to face Broomfield in the next round of the playoffs. In our last of the round 1 games from Monday, our one and only Monday game, 11-seeded Heritage absolutely blew out 22-seeded Air Academy 62-0. We didn't get any stats in that game, so that's going to do it here in the round 1 recap for the 2024 4A Boys Tackle Football Playoffs. This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and I will see you all next week. Peace out. What is good, y'all? This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and we are going to keep it rolling this week with the playoff previews and predictions in the 4A classification for the 2024 Boys Football Playoffs. This week, I will be looking at the 8 teams who had a first-round bye. And for those of you who don't know how these previews work, basically I just talk about each team's top 3 playmakers, and then I go over some key games from the season. After I preview each of these teams, I will then go through the podcast predictions of each of the 8 second-round matchups and our reasons why. We are going to go ahead and start off here with the number 1 seeded Dakota Ridge Eagles. Dakota Ridge went 9-1 in the regular season, and then they went 5-0 in that extremely tough 4A South Metro League. That league consisted of only playoff teams. Every single team in the league made the playoffs. So for them to go 5-0 in that league is very, very impressive. The first player I want to go ahead and highlight here for Dakota Ridge is going to be the junior linebacker and running back Landon Kalsbeck. Kalsbeck has put up 1,100 yards rushing alongside 17 rushing touchdowns on 9 yards per carry. But he's not done there, though, as on defense here, he has been ferocious on the edge on Dakota Ridge's defense, putting up 63 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks. Kalsbeck has been the leader on this defensive front, and his impact on both sides of the ball will definitely be felt here for Dakota Ridge in the playoffs. Next here, we got the junior cornerback, Kobe Stewart. Stewart has put up 33 tackles, 12 pass deflections, and 2 interceptions on the season as the leader of that Dakota Ridge secondary. Dakota Ridge has performed extremely well this season despite facing some very, very tough opponents, and that is large in part to Kobe Stewart's work here in the secondary for this Eagles defense. Another player I want to highlight for Dakota Ridge is going to be the junior defensive tackle, Marcus Weston. Weston's work in the trenches has been huge. With his 6'1", 295 frame, he is very tough to move around, and his ball stopping skills is going to be absolutely crucial for Dakota Ridge in their playoff run. As far as key games go for Dakota Ridge, they have had several this season. They started off in their first game of the season with a loss to Chatfield, who is a playoff team in 5A. They lost 38-23 there. But that would be their one and only loss as they went on a run of absolute dominance against numerous playoff teams. The closest any team got to beating them was when they beat Mesa Ridge 19-14 in their 3rd game of the year, but no other team was able to get within 2 scores of them for the rest of the year. In that very tough South Metro League here in 4A, despite all of those teams making the playoffs, not one of them got within 2 scores against Dakota Ridge. The closest any team got was Heritage, where they lost 42-25, but all these other games are blowouts, including that one, honestly. Then outside of that, they beat Cherokee Trail 31-13. That was a very impressive win. They beat Pomona 34-12, and then they beat Green Mountain 37-20. All those teams I listed are very competitive teams in 3A or 5A. So it is just really impressive to see Dakota Ridge here as the 1 seed despite facing all of that tough playoff talent. We're going to go ahead and pivot now to start talking about the number 8 seeded Ponderosa Mustangs. The Mustangs are also in that 4A South Metro League. They finished with a 7-3 regular season record. And then they went 4-1 in league games, their only loss being to Dakota Ridge in league games. Al Capone VZ is going to be the first player I want to highlight for Ponderosa. VZ has rushed for 1,000 yards this season with 15 rushing touchdowns. He is just that workhorse back that keeps this Ponderosa offense rolling. You can give it to him as many times as you want. He is a Michigan commit for wrestling, so that type of balance and toughness is something that is extremely valuable at the running back position, and you already know he's going to ball out here in the playoffs. And then you also have got the senior wide receiver, Max Mervin. Going into this season, you already knew Mervin was going to be a key contributor for the Mustangs, and he has had a very solid senior season, leading the team in receiving yards. And then defensively, he didn't take a ton of snaps at defensive back, but he still managed to put up 3 interceptions this season. Mervin is the definition of a Swiss Army knife with how versatile he is on both sides of the ball. No matter what the Mustangs coaches need him to do, he can do it. Caden Miller is the next player I want to highlight here. He is a junior linebacker for Ponderosa. He's the leader in tackles on this team with 103, and then he also has 6 tackles for loss. I knew after watching his huddle highlights doing their season preview that this kid was going to be a problem, and he has had a huge junior season here. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some key games for the Mustangs. They were members of the 4A South Metro League with Heritage, Golden, Bear Creek, Highlands Ranch, and Dakota Ridge. They won 4 of those games, with their only loss being a bad one to Dakota Ridge. They lost 36-7 there, but outside of that, they've really taken care of business. They beat Heritage in a shootout 45-34. They shut out Bear Creek 41-0. They stomped on Golden 42-14. And then another shootout they won against Highlands Ranch 42-28. Outside of that, their other 2 losses are to Palmer Ridge and Roosevelt, who are 2 tough teams. And then their other win against a playoff opponent was a 24-14 win over Rampart. Ponderosa is battle-tested for sure, and they have really turned things around towards the end of the season. So I'm excited to see what they do here in the playoffs. Now it is time we look at the 5-seeded Broomfield Eagles. The Eagles finished with a 9-1 regular season record, and then they finished with a perfect 5-0 record in the 4A North 2 League. The first few players I want to highlight here are all on the offensive line for Broomfield. Broomfield has been able to run, pass, do whatever they want very efficiently, and that is large in part to these dudes putting in some very good work in the trenches. We got Evan Haynes and Isaiah Garcia Perez at tackle. And then at guard, you got Ty LaCrue. All 3 of these playmakers should be considered weapons with how important they are to Broomfield's success. Another position group I want to highlight here for Broomfield is going to be their secondary. In the secondary, you got playmakers like Mason Smiley, John Singleton, and Michael Benner. Smiley and Singleton both have 4 interceptions on the season, and then Benner has 2. Benner is an Air Force commit and is one of the better cornerbacks in the entire state. Benner is also the top receiver on this team, putting up 13 receptions for 350 yards and 6 touchdowns. That is 26 yards per reception. Looking at the key games for Broomfield, they didn't have the toughest schedule this year, not really playing many contenders at all. They beat Riverdale Ridge 22-13 in their second to last game of the year to win their league. They shut out Longmont 59-0. They lost to Erie 13-3, and that was their only loss this year. And then they beat Monarch and Frederick by a ton. They smoked Monarch 46-0, and then they beat Frederick 44-20. Broomfield hasn't been tested much outside of that loss to Erie. They beat Legacy only 14-13, so that was really their only concerning win, I guess. But outside of that, it has been a very dominant regular season for Broomfield, and they're looking good going into playoffs. Next up here, we have another 9-1 team in the Palmer Ridge Bears. The Bears also won that 4A SoCo 2 League with a 5-0 record there. The first player I'm going to highlight here is the senior guard, Court Towns. Towns is an Air Force commit, and he's definitely a weapon for this Palmer Ridge offense. His run blocking is absolutely vital for any sort of success that Palmer Ridge has offensively. The leading back of this very good Palmer Ridge rushing attack is going to be the senior running back, Javier Elvira. Elvira has put up 1,285 yards and 15 rushing touchdowns on 11 yards per carry. Those, folks, are some absolutely ridiculous numbers, and I can say after seeing him play against Mesa Ridge, he's definitely the catalyst of this offense. They really did not have much success offensively unless they were feeding Elvira. The Baylor commit, Rhett Armstrong, is going to be the next player I want to highlight here. Armstrong adds another layer to this Palmer Ridge offense. Kicking is not an easy thing to do, especially at the high school level, but Armstrong makes it look easy. and it gives Palmer Ridge an option to go to in the clutch when they need 3 points. Looking at this Palmer Ridge schedule, they have dominated at every point this season outside of 2 games. They only beat Durango 24-21. Then they lost a close one to Mesa Ridge 31-28. And I actually got to see that game, and if they just had fed Javier Elvira more in the second half, they would have easily won this game by 1 or 2 scores. But they really started to figure it out after that game, feeding Elvira non-stop on their way to a 5-0 record and a league championship in that 4A SoCo 2 league. They've got Rampart in the second round matchup, and that's a great matchup for them because they already beat Rampart in the second to last game of the year, 50-13. So I think Palmer Ridge is definitely feeling good here heading into their first matchup in the playoffs this year. We are going to go ahead and move on now to talk about the 3-seeded Pueblo West Cyclones. The Cyclones finished with a 9-1 record overall in the regular season, and then they finished with a 4-1 record in league games in that 4A SoCo 1 league. The first player I want to highlight here for the Cyclones is going to be the senior QB Gavin Lockett. Lockett is in his 3rd year starting here for the Cyclones at quarterback. He didn't throw the ball a ton this year compared to last year. He only had 95 total attempts for 946 yards, 12 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions. That's good for a 122 rating. And then rushing the ball, he had a very good season. He had 882 yards with 15 rushing touchdowns on 8 yards per carry. Lockett's plummet in yards compared to last year is not necessarily concerning, considering how much success that Pueblo West had in the regular season this year, but it is definitely something to monitor heading into their first game in the playoffs. The leading receiver for the Cyclones is the 6'5" senior wide receiver, Brock Keck. Keck is by far the leading receiver for the Cyclones in every category. He finished with 27 receptions for 438 yards and 5 touchdowns. If the Cyclones do ever decide to lean on the pass game in the playoffs, then it will be through Brock Keck. A massive contributor up front for the Cyclones is going to be the junior defensive end, Matthew Zeck. Zeck is 4th on the team in tackles, and he has 9 tackles for loss and a team-leading 4.5 sacks. Having that player up front to strike fear into opposing quarterbacks and running backs is vital for a contending team, so keep an eye on what Zeck does for the Cyclones in these playoffs. Taking a glance at the schedule for the Cyclones, they face numerous playoff teams this year, with their only loss being in the last game of the year in the league championship at Montrose, 27-24. And then from there, they beat Mesa Ridge 31-28. They beat Doherty 56-14. They beat Vista Ridge 35-7. They beat Lutheran and Pomona. And then they shut down Loveland in the first game of the year 42-0. With plenty of close games and tough teams on their regular season schedule, I've got a feeling that Pueblo West is definitely ready here heading into playoffs. Next team I'm going to talk about here, I want to get this Montrose preview out of the way. Since they don't have any stats put out for their players, I'm not sure who to highlight, but they had a perfect 10-0 regular season record with a 5-0 record in league in that 4A SoCo 1 league, and they were obviously champs there. Their key wins are a 42-16 win over Durango in the first win of the year. They dominated Palisade and Grand Junction Central. They dominated Doherty 56-27. They won a close one over Mesa Ridge 32-28. And then they won a close one over Pueblo West 27-24. So that wing T definitely getting them to win these close games. It will be interesting to see what they do in the playoffs and if they can finally get over that hump and win a state championship. Staying in that 4A SoCo 1 league, we got the 5-seeded Mesa Ridge Grizzlies. The Grizzlies finished with a 7-3 overall record and a 3-2 record in league games. In his senior season, quarterback Bryce Reel had by far his best season for Mesa Ridge. He led this offense with 2,261 yards passing, with 27 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions in a very pass-heavy offense. And that is good for a 135.8 rating. And then on the ground, he also added 546 yards and 6 touchdowns on 9.6 yards per carry. Mesa Ridge has a ton of targets to pass to, and Bryce Reel took full advantage this season. He did have a couple of hiccups, though, in their 3 losses this season. He only had 65 yards against Dakota Ridge, and then those games against Montrose and Pueblo West were not his best games statistically. If there is anyone that could come back and turn it around, though, if he sees them again, it's Bryce Reel. Leading the charge in the run game is the junior running back Trevone Salas. Salas is a big, violent runner. He put up 13 rushing touchdowns and 840 yards. The Grizzlies can lean on him to move the sticks, and he has plenty of ability to break out for a massive run at any point. This 1-2 punch with Reel is one of the best in the entire state, without a doubt. Now I just want to highlight the entire receiving core for Mesa Ridge. This team is absolutely stacked with targets. The leading receiver in yards is going to be Sonny Rogers. The senior receiver put up nearly 800 yards and 8 receiving touchdowns on 37 receptions. And then the leader in receptions on this team is the senior receiver Anthony Smith. Smith put up 40 receptions for nearly 600 yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. Then you have the senior tight end Xander Iwanski with 366 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns on 29 receptions. And then only playing in 5 games this year, you got the Vista Ridge transfer Kobe Dooley. The junior receiver in only 5 games put up 258 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns on 14 receptions. I'm not sure there's a better receiving core in the state outside of teams like Valor and Cherry Creek, so they are definitely one of the most exciting teams to watch in the entire state, in my opinion. For key games this season for the Grizzlies, they played in a ton of shootouts this season. In the second game of the year, they beat Northfield 50-47. They beat Heritage 40-28. They beat Palmer Ridge at Palmer Ridge 31-28. I actually got to witness that game. And then they lost a couple of tough ones to Pueblo West and Montrose, 31-28 and 32-28 respectively. The Grizzlies are definitely battle-tested with multiple close games on their schedule, but what concerns me is if they run into one of those run-heavy teams that loves to pound the rock, because I'm not sure if that defense can keep up. This is one of the most stacked offenses in the state, though, and I expect them to fight until the very last snap. And I honestly love their chances for a state championship this year. Last but not least, folks, we got the 6-seeded Durango Demons. The Demons finished with a 7-3 overall record in the regular season, with a 4-1 league record in the 4A SoCo 2 League. They finished second right behind Palmer Ridge. The first player I want to highlight for the Demons is going to be the senior quarterback, Coley Feeney. In his first year as the starter for the Demons, Feeney had a great year. He finished with 1,500 yards passing with 17 touchdowns and 6 interceptions for a 100 rating. And then rushing the ball, he finished with a team-leading 600 yards and 9 touchdowns. Feeney not only leading the team in pass yards, but rush yards as well, just shows how much of an impact that he's had on this Demons team. Feeney's leading target is the junior wide receiver, Sebastian Tripp. Tripp leads the team in receptions, yards, and touchdowns with 29 receptions for nearly 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. Win or loss, rain or snow, Sebastian Tripp has had a huge game for the Demons in just about every game this season for them. Senior defensive end Gage Voiles is probably the most impactful player on this defense. He has 21 tackles for loss, 51 tackles, and a team-leading 4 sacks. Voiles lit up the stat sheet with several tackles for loss in basically every game they've played this year, so he's definitely a key playmaker here for the Demons. Taking a look at this Durango schedule, they had a few key games this year. They started off with a couple of losses to Montrose and Farmington. That Farmington game, they definitely should have won. And then they caught a bit of a hot streak as they beat Piedra Vista, Palisade, Grand Junction, and Rampart for 4 straight wins before losing to Palmer Ridge in what ended up being the league championship 24-21. Outside of that Palmer Ridge loss, they beat Air Academy 58-0. They shut out Liberty 42-0, and then they won a close one over Vista Ridge in the final game of the year 20-14. Durango has plenty of depth at receiver and on defense, and with Coley Feeney leading the way at quarterback, I think I like their chances going into playoffs. And that, folks, is going to wrap up the previews for the 8 teams with a first-round bye in the 4A classification for the 2024 Boys Tackle Football Playoffs. This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and I will see you all in a bit for the predictions here for round 2 of the 4A playoffs. Peace out. Now, folks, I'm just going to take some time to go through each member of the podcast's predictions for round 2 of the 4A playoffs, and I will also be giving my predictions as well. We are going to go ahead and start off with this Dakota Ridge versus Loveland matchup. Coach V has Dakota Ridge winning. He says, roll on Dakota Ridge. This is a solid enough Loveland team where you can't dismiss them, but there shouldn't be any excuse for losing here for Dakota Ridge. I also have Dakota Ridge winning this one. I just feel like Loveland is a year away from really competing in a game like this. Gideon has Dakota Ridge winning. He says, I don't mean to sound dismissive, but if you can face Mesa Ridge and do what you did there, you can beat Loveland. Loveland's best chance is Cody Moore zeroing in on Landon Carlsbeck, but I don't think that even then the Red Wolves would come out on top. Phoenix also has Dakota Ridge winning in this matchup. He says, this Dakota Ridge team has been preparing themselves all season to be where they are right now in the playoffs, and they will be facing a Loveland team that has struggled this season and have fallen in crucial games. I feel that Dakota Ridge will handily take care of Loveland as they are the team on a mission this season. Cody has Dakota Ridge as well. He says, if the Eagles lose this, I am not sure about this coaching staff heading forward, simply because the talent gap, especially at the top, is in Dakota Ridge's favor, and they should be all right. Next now, we're going to look at this Ponderosa versus Grand Junction matchup. Coach V has Ponderosa winning this one. He says, this defense can stop a lot of offenses here in 4A, especially teams like Grand Junction who rely on the run first. If there's one thing Pondo does well, it's play the run. On top of that, I'm not confident in this Grand Junction defense. Give me Pondo. And I gotta agree there. I have Ponderosa winning this one as well. I think Ponderosa is one of the top tackling teams in the state. That is a very well-coached defense. So I think they will fare well here against a Grand Junction team that relies on the run. And I think just personnel-wise, I think Ponderosa has the edge here. For Gideon, he says, hot take, I give this to Grand Junction. Will Applegate and company just dropped 60 on a Longmont team that scraped into the playoffs, but I don't feel great about Ponderosa. I don't think that anyone on that Pondo defense can bring down Will Applegate, and I definitely don't think that the drive will affect the Tigers at all. I feel like the momentum for Grand Junction is too great, but I could honestly see it either way. I think it's a one-score game, but I give it to the Tigers. Taking a look at Phoenix pick here, he also has Ponderosa winning this one. He says, I'm leaning towards Pondo in this one for strength of schedule and the bye week in their favor over Grand Junction. They just have a far more impressive resume going in, and it's really up to them to execute. Cody also has Ponderosa. He says they better be dialed in, but as far as talent at every single position goes, this is the Stangs game to lose. So that will take us to the next matchup where Palmer Ridge is facing off against Rampart. Coach V has Palmer Ridge winning this one. He says, survive and endure. That's what Palmer Ridge will do and more versus Rampart. I also have Palmer Ridge winning this one, really just because they played them a few weeks ago and completely slaughtered Rampart. These are familiar foes, and I just trust Palmer Ridge to take care of business there. Gideon has Palmer Ridge as well. He says, unless something wild happens, the Bears won this matchup by 37 in the regular season, and I don't think anything has happened that would turn this into a Ram victory. Phoenix has Palmer Ridge as well. He says this team is looking to go back to the state championship game, and they'll have to get through Rampart to do it. I've been very impressed with how Palmer Ridge has played this season, and I feel they are the stronger team here entering this matchup. Cody also has Palmer Ridge. He says they have a chance to send a message to the rest of 4A with a physical and dominant win. I definitely agree with everyone there, so let's look at the next matchup where Broomfield will be facing off against Vista Ridge. Coach V has Broomfield here. He says this Vista Ridge team looked horrible against a Pueblo West team that doesn't nearly have the offensive line talent as Broomfield. If I'm Broomfield, I won't overthink this game plan, pound the rock, and preach aggression on both sides of the ball. That's it. I also have Broomfield here. I think with just how dominant that offensive line is and how efficient their offense has been, and I love their secondary as well, I think this should be a 2-3 score win for Broomfield. Gideon also has Broomfield. He says basically the offensive line. Broomfield's O-line is arguably the best in the classification, and I don't think anyone on Vista Ridge's D-line can match it. Also, the secondary for Broomfield is superior to Vista Ridge's receiver core, and I just don't see Vista Ridge winning this. Broomfield just gives the ball to CT and let him cook. Phoenix has Broomfield as well. He says they have been a team on a mission since getting humbled by Erie. Vista Ridge will be their strongest opponent since then, other than Riverdale Ridge, so it won't be easy, but he's got Broomfield in this one. Cody has Broomfield as well. He says the Eagles feast on turnovers, and Vista Ridge has not ran what is exactly a mistake-free or clean offense. Not to mention up front, Broomfield could run over almost any team in any classification, and Vista Ridge will probably resemble a wet piece of paper in resistance. Coach Stauffer definitely delivering some ice-cold truth there, but let's go ahead and move into this next matchup here where Montrose will be facing off against Frederick. Coach V has Frederick winning this one. He says, I'm sure I am in the minority, but this Montrose team has played poorly against good QBs such as Leland Fresquez, Gavin Lockett, and Bryce Reel. Their offense has bailed this defense out, but now they face a coach in Matt Lloyd who has run the wing T before, and he knows how to stop it. Gavin Ishmael and company have nothing to lose, and that makes them dangerous. I love that take there from Coach V, but I have Montrose winning this one. I think Montrose just pounds the rock better than most teams, and yes, Frederick is familiar with the wing T, but ultimately I just don't think they match up well against a Montrose team that is ready to run over anyone. Their defense is a little bit suspect, but ultimately I have Montrose taking this one. Gideon has Frederick. He says, screw it. The Golden Eagles are a strong, disciplined team. Montrose hasn't faced a QB of Gavin Ishmael's breed this year, and when they have faced players that are close, those have been their closer games. I think that Frederick has learned from the Mohai loss and that the Eagles will fly. However, I may very well be wrong, but I give it to Frederick by 3. Montrose is simply OP, but every OP squad has a counter. For Phoenix, he's got Montrose here. He said they have been perfect all season and have handedly beat some impressive teams this season that are also in the playoffs. And Frederick, despite having a top QB in 4A, have struggled against top 4A teams, and Montrose is no different. Cody has Montrose winning this one. He says, as much as I want to go with our guy Ishmael, I'm looking at Frederick's schedule, and there just isn't really a signature win against a team that inspires me to pick them over Montrose that has won against top teams, and I think they keep that rolling here against Frederick. In our second to last of the round 2 matchups, we got Pueblo West versus Golden. Coach V has got Pueblo West here. He says West has had time to relax and recover in time for the playoffs. Golden, on the other hand, just barely got by Riverdale Ridge, who has a solid dual threat QB of their own. I think Lockett and company will be too much for Golden to handle, not to mention their run game, which will be tough to stop anyways. I am also going to go ahead and pick Pueblo West here. I think ultimately Pueblo West is just more battle-tested. They've had a very tough schedule, and they've succeeded very well against that tough schedule, whereas Golden also has had a tough schedule, but they haven't fared very well against it. Ultimately, I like Pueblo West's experience compared to Golden's, and honestly, I just don't think Gavin Lockett's going to lose this early in his senior season. Gideon has also got Pueblo West here. He said Golden squeaked past a decent but inexperienced Riverdale Ridge team. Pueblo West would have beat Riverdale Ridge by 20, and Golden will likely struggle against Lockett's run game. Phoenix has got Pueblo West in this one as well. He says, they have looked like the more complete team in 4A thus far, and I would genuinely be shocked if Golden came away with a win. Cody has got Pueblo West winning here as well. He says, the bye week is always a huge breather to have, and with health and rest on their side, I think they take an advantage of a tired Golden team that I think talent-wise is not quite on the Cyclones level. Next up, we got Mesa Ridge versus Monarch. Coach V has got Mesa Ridge winning this one. He says they have the firepower to score 30 at any time against any team. Dakota Ridge was the only team to hold them to only 2 scores, and even then, that's without Kobe Dooley. This Monarch defense is unfortunately not Dakota Ridge. I also am going to go with Mesa Ridge here. This is one of the most talented offenses that I've ever seen, especially in the 4A classification, so I really just don't see them losing this early with how many seniors they have on that offense. The defense is the big question mark here, but I don't think that Mesa Ridge loses this early. Gideon also has Mesa Ridge. He says, as much as I like Riley Montemayor and Jeff Santee, I give this to Mesa Ridge. A good line, a good secondary, a great QB in the toughest league in 4A. Congratulations to Monarch for the best season in recent memory, but roll Grizz. Phoenix also has Mesa Ridge here. He says, I've got the Ridge over Monarch since they have a more impressive resume against a solid 4A teams this season compared to Monarch, who got shut out bad against Broomfield. Ridge has played some very impressive teams this season and even played a tough league, losing to Montrose and Pueblo West in close but tough losses. I've got them over Monarch. Cody also has Mesa Ridge winning here. He says, the Grizzlies are looking to host Monarch and have won their share of close games against top teams, much less at home. The final matchup in round 2 in the 4A playoffs is going to be between 11-seeded Heritage versus 6-seeded Durango. Coach V has Durango winning this one. He says traveling to play in Durango for a playoff game is never easy. This team is slept on still, despite competing at a high level this season. I think they match up well with Heritage defensively, and offensively they have some firepower to challenge this team. I personally have Heritage this one. I think this team is red hot offensively, and they have plenty of weapons on that side of the ball to compete with Durango. The defense is a little bit of a question mark, but honestly, I trust Heritage to win a shootout against Durango if it comes down to that, since they've been in so many of those this season. Gideon has Durango winning this one. He says, with the most intense home field advantage in 4A, along with a well-distributed offense and defense, I think that Durango will take this. Outside of Mesa Ridge, the Demons were the closest to beating Palmer Ridge this year out of anyone. And even without Braxton Waddle, best of luck on your recovery, Braxton. I think that the defense is well-rounded enough to stop most of Heritage's weapons. Tanner Turch and Cam Jensen are the toughest duo that Durango will have faced this year, but Durango are the more well-rounded team in my opinion. Cody has Durango winning this one as well. He says these teams actually match up really well, and this should make for an instant classic, but I'm going to lean on the side of home field advantage, but this one could go either way, especially if Tanner Turch wins some of the one-on-ones. This could be a big upset alert for Heritage. And that, folks, will do it here for the 4A Round 2 predictions for the 2024 Boys Tackle Football Playoffs. This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and I will see you all next week. Peace out.
Hey, everybody. It is one of your hosts for this episode, Cody Stauffer here, and we are going to go over the 5A classification, talking about what happened in the first round of the postseason, as well as looking ahead to the second round. That includes kind of doing a little preview for the teams that we didn't talk about last week, being seeds 1 through 8, and then talking about picks a little bit and looking ahead to the future. But for now, let's go ahead and start in the past, going back to the future a little bit here, and talk about the first round of the playoffs. Now, I actually attended 2 playoff games this past weekend, but neither were super exciting, so I'm not going to do a full recap on them. Just going to kind of breeze by, starting with Erie versus Overland here, where Braylon Tolliver took the opening punt to the house, and it was kind of just all downhill for the Trailblazers from there. Ronan Ward got 2 passing touchdowns and a 60-yard rushing touchdown before the end of the first quarter. I'd roll out, especially with Jarius Ward kind of looking unhealthy for Overland. Looking back at the box score, though, before all was said and done, he'd have a long rushing touchdown in the second half, but that wouldn't be enough as Erie would win 48-6 to advance to round 2 against Pine Creek. As for Denver East versus Grandview, this game was a slow burner with only 10 cumulative points through 3 quarters. East came out stringing together a nice drive with sweet boundary passes, nice runs up the middle, but it would not be a trend that would last throughout the game as the Wolves controlled the clock and the ball with strength. Caleb Yamas here, 163 yards on 20 carries, including a long of 43, and really helped out a Blitz McCarty that definitely looked a little lost out there sometimes in his first ever playoff start. Not necessarily unexpected for a young player here, but Grandview, I feel like, kind of knew what they needed to do as far as defensively holding very stout, the secondary locking in after that first drive, and the edge rush getting home and forcing some serious hurries that would cause some problems for Denver East's pass game as well as their running game just a little bit. It's mostly uneventful, honestly. Neither team's performance really inspired me for whoever would win against, Cherry Creek, but ultimately Grandview advances 17-3. Moving along, Chatfield shrugs off a safety in the first quarter to roll to a 36-9 W here that, they don't really have a ton of stats on. Cash Williams threw 3 passing touchdowns. Brock Narva had 1 catching and 1 rushing touchdown. And meanwhile, for the Jaguars here, Tyler Mayer did what he could, 160 rushing yards, but just not enough in this big loss in Chatfield's house. Now, Fossil Ridge versus Mullen, it was all Fossil Ridge over Mullen, 49-7. Mullen barely eclipsed 200 yards of total offense, and in contrast, Fossil Ridge had over 500. Kubat goes 29-45 for 408 yards and 3 scores. Meanwhile, Marcus Mosier rushes for 2 touchdowns as well as catches 132 yards. And then Harley Schmidt and Luke Garvin here combined for 12 receptions, 192 yards, and 3 scores in the big win for the SaberCats. Now, this is a game that I did wish that I went to because this one looked insane here. Arapahoe jumped out to a 28-0 lead prior to halftime, but Douglas County scored right before half and right out of half to cut the score to just 2 scores, cut the deficit to 2 scores, and then starting the fourth quarter got another score to make it a 1-score game for a little bit of a scare here. But Arapahoe responds with a 60-yard passing touchdown to Andrew Smart to reestablish a 2-score lead. And then Brody Seek, sorry if I've been mispronouncing that, recovers a fumble after forcing it and gives them a chance to reestablish a bigger lead with Tackett popping off a rushing touchdown here. And ultimately, the final score favors Arapahoe 49-35. Now, for Douglas County, junior quarterback Jaden Adragna here was critical to this comeback attempt for the Huskies, going 21 of 31 for 340 yards and 4 touchdowns, primarily leaning on Nolan Case and Roman Saiz here 9 and 6 times respectively for nearly 200 yards and a score each. Defensively, Caden Absher was all over the field, 8 tackles, 3 for loss, and a sack, shortly joined by Cameron Caillou here, who had 7 tackles of his own. But the Arapahoe defense was doing their thing. They forced 3 turnovers, including Brody Seek, who forced and recovered a fumble, along with 3 sacks in a dominant Playmaker of the Week-esque showing here. Offensively, Andrew Smart was going all day, though. 5 catches, 118 yards, and a hat trick of scores in a Playmaker of the Week level performance. Complementarily, though, Jaden Tackett ran for 147 yards and a score. Meanwhile, Mitch Price's final stat line was 12 of 17 for 144 yards and 3 scores. Now, talking Sunday football here in Colorado high school football following the quote-unquote winter storm of Thursday, Friday, and Saturday here. The Centennial League kept it rolling to start Sunday with Cherokee Trail's upset of Castleview 25-7 here. Tyson Smith goes 10 of 14 for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, one to Marquise Jameson and the other one to Cade Brook, getting some of their defensive guys involved on offense. Meanwhile, on the ground, Noah Collins and Brian Tucker combined for 33 carries on 150 yards, with Collins finding pay dirt And then defensively, Marquise Jamison also notched an interception. So a touchdown reception and an interception in a Playmaker of the Week spotlight here. Now, heading forward, Arvada West hosted the Fort Collins Lambkins here, and A-West jumped out to a 38-7 halftime lead. And while the Lambkins would try and make it interesting, scoring 22 in the third quarter to make it 29-45 heading into the fourth, that's where the magic ran out. Jack McKeon here had himself a game for the Lambkins, 34 carries, 208 yards, and a trio of scores, but unfortunately the passing game just struggled. Justin Cranford threw 2 picks to just 1 touchdown and completed just 48% of his passes, primarily leaning on Levi Hermson, 8 receptions for 143 yards, and then found Riley Forbes for his lone touchdown pass. As for the Wildcats, they ran for over 400 yards, with Samala's 291-yard, 3-touchdown performance stealing the show, and Logan Duhacek played complimentary football, 21 of 26, 2 TDs to just 1 pick, 207 yards in the win. And for the last playoff game of the 5A Round 1, the Centennial League came to an abrupt end of their role as Regis Jesuit beat Eagle Crest 45-14. Benjamin Bacon of the Raiders ran 24 times for 115 yards and a score. Meanwhile, Luke Rubley went 12 of 20 for 192 yards and 3 scores, finding Peyton Lindell for 2 of those and McPherson for the other one. And for another touchdown, just throw in sophomore Cade Philemon's pick 6, and that makes for an easy day at the races for the Regis Jesuit Raiders. All right, so as I go through the next round of the playoffs, I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on the teams that we haven't really heard from before, kind of like I did last week. I'm going to briefly mention where their opponent, who we did a full preview for last week, is sitting at. If you want to know more about those teams, just jump back to last episode and listen through that. But then following that, we're going to go through the picks of everyone in the podcast. So without further ado, the very first matchup we're going to be talking about from Quadrant 1 is a matchup Friday night at 7 p.m. where number 1 Cherry Creek will host number 17 Grandview here. The winner of that will play the winner of Pine Creek versus Erie. Grandview sits at 6-5 now, with their notable playmakers being Yamas, Blanks, Nito, and McCarty. But Cherry Creek here, to talk a little bit more about them in depth, are 9-1. They lost their opening game on the road in Utah 24-14 before beating Highland Park 51-39 in Texas in a historic win, coming back, beating Pine Creek 21-14 and rolling through league. So winning a ton of games here, but really wanted to highlight that Highland Park one that is critical to putting Colorado on the map and showing that we are a football state. Meanwhile, the top performers for this team, you got to talk about Jaden Fox, who is kind of the center point, I guess, of this offense in some ways, how they run the ball so much. 1,278 yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, but Brady Vodica here has had himself quite the season himself. 2,105 passing yards, not to mention 20 passing touchdowns and another 7 rushing touchdowns here. And this is one of his more efficient passing seasons, and it's hard to see, or it's not hard to see why, with the receiving core that he has, highlighted by 3-star Charlotte commit Jeremiah Hoffman, who leads the receivers with 709 yards and 6 scores. But Junior Lavette is shortly behind him at 5 receiving touchdowns. And then sophomore Landrum Hamilton has 400 receiving yards himself. So a pretty balanced multi-head attack with receivers that all excel in different ways. But the defense is usually the story here behind the Bruins' bruising success here. And it's no different this year with a stud secondary that includes the likes of Aiden Kanapke, 80 tackles, 2 picks, Trevon Polk, who has 2 interceptions on the season, and then guys who can get it done in a few different ways like Ashton Shepardson, 2 interceptions, 6 sacks, and other pass rushers / run stuffers include the likes of Jack Francis, Kane Brackney, Keegan Perea, T.I., and just a ton of big bodies up in this front 7 here that makes this defensive unit special, especially this defensive line. It is just a terrifying line to go against here, and that sets up Creek for a deep postseason run, or so I think here. Let's see what the rest of the fellas think as far as this matchup, where I definitely have Cherry Creek here. Starting off with Coach V here, he says, Cherry Creek, quote, "This isn't the round they'll lose. If any, a loss here would be massive for Creek," end quote. Gino says, Cherry Creek, quote, "I remember this rivalry almost too well, dating back to my days at Grandview. Unfortunately for the Wolves, however, Cherry Creek is simply way too good to lose this early. With this being a rivalry game, though, I would say that Grandview could definitely make this a 2-score game or closer," end quote. So a little bit of insight here from Gino, that Centennial League experience. And we're going to go over to Gideon here, who has Creek as well, saying, quote, "This is one of the best secondaries that the Bruins have faced this year, but Creek's run game still produces dividends. I give it to Creek," end quote. Phoenix here has Creek saying, quote, "They are one of, if not the most complete team in 5A right now and are the big favorites to go back to state. They had previously played November 1st with Cherry Creek coming out on top, and I anticipate that same result," end quote. Yeah, I think, to just echo what the rest of the fellas are saying, that this is Creek's game to lose, and I would be very, very surprised if they lost to Grandview, especially after just beating them a couple weeks ago. I know it's hard to beat a team twice in a season, but really the talent level of Creek should not let that happen. Moving on here, in the same quadrant, we got number 8 Pine Creek versus number 9 Erie. This is also Friday, 11:15 at 7 p.m. down in the Springs. I want to say Gino might make it to that game here. But regardless, the winner plays the winner of Creek and Grandview. Erie is now 9-2 with Gavin Lusk looking to be healthy and ready to contribute on top of the role that they're on with Ronan Ward and Braylon Tolliver following that huge Overland win. Pine Creek, during their regular season here, went 7-3. They lost their opening game on the road to Valor 31-14, and then lost 2 in the middle of the season, 21-14 to Cherry Creek and 24-7 to Legend. But they rolled through the rest of league, including a 28-14 win over Regis. Not to mention they beat Arapahoe earlier in the season, 34-13 at home, amid some controversy, I might say. But a win is a win here. Offensively, they've leaned on a backfield committee of Caleb Petrie and Xavier Lukes, who combined for over 900 yards and 6 scores apiece. Meanwhile, Elijah Roy is one of the biggest one-on-one threats you could have at wide receiver and is an absolute dude out there who causes some problems for defense. Speaking of defense, defensively, Emmanuel Hill had 15 tackles for loss, joining Jared Ibarra, Caden DeCoste, Nico Drupewski, and Joseph Rolfe, who all had double-digit TFLs. This team is very stout against the run, and as a squad, they combined for 23.5 sacks and forced 17 turnovers this year, making for opportunistic offense and playmaking defense. As far as picks go, let's go ahead and see what everyone has to say here, and we'll work our way backwards here. Starting with myself, with Erie here, I just think that the amount of playmakers the Tigers have at every single position is nuts. I think their big play potential is amongst the best in any classification in the state, and they still have solid size up front. Meanwhile, I also trust Coach Geiger and his staff to win if it comes to a battle of the wits. Phoenix here is going to go with Erie, saying, quote, "They're coming in with a lot to prove as last year's 4A state champs, and they have a far more impressive resume going in than Pine Creek," end quote. Okay, far more, Phoenix says here. Gideon here will also take Erie, saying, quote, "The Tigers will win this by 1 score, but this is a team that knows the playoffs. They know what the situation feels like and how to survive it. With Braylon Tolliver and Cole Powell, this will be hard to top. I see a world where Pine Creek wins, but Erie played a better schedule and did better in it," end quote. Gino here stands alone, picking Pine Creek here, saying, quote, "Pine Creek's experience in 5A playoffs has me leaning their way here. This one could absolutely go Erie's way, though," end quote. And Coach V here, wrapping it up, saying, quote, "I think this one will be close, but I feel like Erie has, and I feel like they got an offense that can explode for 3+ touchdowns. Like I said, it'll be close, but Erie will give them their best game and probably win," end quote. So, in a surprising turn of events, that is 4 votes for the 9-seeded Erie on the road here. Gino here picking Pine Creek, the home team. So we'll see what happens if this is an upset waiting to happen, or if Pine Creek's earlier departure from 4A will serve them dividends here in the 5A playoffs. Moving along here, we got number 4 Columbine here against number 20 Cherokee Trail. This game will take place on November 16th at 6 p.m., and the winner will play the winner of the Holy War. For those not in the know, that is Regis versus Valor. Cherokee Trail is now 5-6 off an upset over Castleview, utilizing players both ways like Cade Brook and Marquise Jameson. However, Columbine went 9-1. Their only loss was an overtime thriller to Ralston Valley, 35-34. Otherwise, they smacked Denver East, Arvada West, and Chatfield by a margin of 111-36, and then had closer wins over playoff teams like Legend, 16-14, and Fossil Ridge, 35-21. They got their usual 3,000 yards of rushing, led by Basinger and Snyder, who combined for 40 touchdowns. Meanwhile, defensively, Will Monroe, I'd say, highlighted the defense here with 9 sacks of the team's 24. Per usual, they did a dookie job of tracking TFLs and recorded none, but in the secondary, Basinger had 2 picks and Villalpando had 3, actually leading this squad here. 4 picks here. Coach V picks Columbine and is quoted as saying, E. End quote. Moving on to Gino here, he has Columbine saying, quote, the reigning state champs should definitely win this one. CT's win over Castleview was very impressive, though, so maybe they can make this game close, end quote. Gideon has Columbine saying, quote, the Rebels are just going to run their system into Cherokee Trail's face, and CT can't do much about it, end quote. Phoenix says, quote, Columbine, they have one of the most dominant run games in Colorado high school football, and Cherokee Trail is simply not that good to stop it, end quote. I'm also just going to echo everything here. Look, Cherokee Trail, congratulations on a first-round playoff win, but holy cow, I do not think this is going to be a very fun game to watch. Moving along here, we got number 5, Valor Christian versus number 12, Regis Jesuit in a rematch from a game earlier this season. This is the Holy War Part 2 taking place at 11 a.m. Saturday morning here at Valor Christian High School here, and the winner will play the winner of Columbine and Cherokee Trail. Regis is now 6-5 after whooping Eagle Crest, but Valor awaits for them at 9-1, having previously beat Regis earlier in the season 17-0. Meanwhile, they beat an out-of-state opponent 30-14, Pine Creek, who we just talked about, 31-14, Ralston Valley, who we will talk about, 34-17, and we're 4-1 in league with only a wild loss to Mountain Vista, 62-21. Offensively here, Dawson Olk has been pretty pleasantly surprising here under center, almost reaching 2,000 yards passing and 19 scores. This offense ran through Cash Spence, though. It's really hard to not tell. 57 receptions for 755 yards and 11 scores. Meanwhile, finding ways to get him the ball, 10 rushing scores in addition to his receiving prowess. That's what good coaching staffs do. They find their playmaker and they find creative ways to get him the ball, and Cash Spence is one of the best athletes in the state, and McGatlin made sure to do so. Not to mention, you could argue that they've underutilized Ben Herbeck to this point. He's a really solid second option out there at wide receiver. And then Chase Hanosh actually leads the backfield with 830 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns of his own. Defensively, Moses Freeman is the heart of this defense at 74 tackles and 9 for loss, but he backs up a very talented line in Elliott Smith, Braden Oblachinsky, Zay Amaro, and Cannon Smith here. All of those guys wreaking havoc in the trenches here. They got some size, they have some physicality here, and Moses just does a good job of backing them up. Now let's go ahead and head over to the picks here and just start with our Fort Collins folks here. Gideon has Valor Christian saying, quote, Jackson Roper is the only player on Regis' D-line that I truly trust against the juggernauts of Valor. The Eagles' entire line is over 270, and they have a good pass game. I still remember what Creek did, and I think it will be similar, end quote. Phoenix here has Valor saying, quote, they handled Regis with ease back in August when they shut them out 17-0, and I have them taking care of business again, end quote. Short and sweet. Gino here to head down to our Southern Colorado folks has Valor saying, quote, the Holy War has reached the playoffs. This game is going to be thrilling, but I ultimately believe that Valor is going to repeat what they did to Regis earlier in the year and win by a couple of scores. Valor's talent on the offensive line plus their stacked defense and wide receiver core should get them the win here like usual, end quote. Coach V has Valor saying, quote, the idea of Holy War Part 2 goes crazy in theory. This game won't. Give me Valor, end quote. And that's coming from Simon, who was there during the throttling of Valor, but was also there during the throttling of Regis against Creek here. So he's seen both these teams at probably arguably their lowest here and still has Valor pretty decidedly. I also have Valor here. I think that this team has just been way more consistent this season, and I just don't trust Regis's consistency or physicality to really hang in this game. So that is a clean sweep for Valor here against Regis, at least according to our predictions. Moving along here, we have number 2 Mountain Vista hosting number 15 Fossil Ridge November 15th at 7 p.m. I want to say Mason and I will be attending this game, so stay tuned for that. The winner will play the winner of Fairview versus Chatfield here. Fossil Ridge is now 7-4, courtesy of Kubat and Mosier Fireworks against Mullen. But let's talk about Mountain Vista here, who is undefeated, having beat playoff teams such as Arapahoe, Erie, Cherokee Trail, and Valor Christian, and have an overall point differential of 551 to just 68 here. How is that even possible? Well, it all starts with Austin Madreski here, who is now Colorado's all-time passing yards leader, completions leader, and touchdown leader, and will just continue to pile it on following his 2,950 touchdown regular season experience. That includes them definitely taking their foot off the gas sometimes here. Probably could have broke single season records out the wazoo if they wanted to, but Madreski is a solid leader who spreads the ball out really well to a very talented receiving core. Sean Conway, Ja'Kai Mack, Japri Jennings, and even Brooklyn Bailey and Sammy Brown all 8 this season, but those top 3 of Conway, Mack, and Jennings combined for over 1,500 yards and 24 scores, headlined by Conway's 11 receiving touchdowns. Out of the backfield, though, Jack Blaze ran for 770 yards, but caught another 548 yards for over 1,300 yards on the season and a cumulative 22 touchdowns. And defensively, this is the big story for me for the Golden Eagles compared to years past where they were just in track meets all the time. Bryce Bailey, honestly, is one of the top cornerbacks in the state. Carter Daniels is one of the leading tacklers, and the defensive line is one of the most noticeably improved position groups here out of any team in any classification, notching 24 sacks and over 70 hurries this season. Let's go ahead and take a look at the picks here, starting down south with Coach V saying, while this can be a fun shootout, I just don't see any defense stopping this offense early on into the postseason. Personally, I don't think this defense of Mountain Vista matches up better than Fossil Ridge's. Or I also think this defense matches up better than Fossil Ridge's. He's got Mountain Vista. Gino has Mountain Vista saying, quote, 2 high-powered offenses, except one of them is just way more high-powered than the other, end quote. He's got 5 Ys in there, so that's why it's said like that. But back to Gino's quote here, quote, the Golden Eagles have their eyes on a championship, and it won't be Fossil Ridge that ends that, end quote. Gideon here, our Fort Collins guys. Let's see if they side with their hometown team here. Well, at least where they go to school, their school town team, I should say. But Gideon doesn't think so, saying, quote, while Nick Kubat, Marcus Mosier, and Owen Wind will put on a show, I think Vista has even more overwhelming firepower. Watch for a final score of 56-35, end quote. Phoenix has Mountain Vista saying, quote, they have remained perfect this season with their high-powered offense and consistently impressive defense, with the most points they've allowed this season being 21 to Valor, a matchup they won 62-21. Fossil Ridge will definitely try to match that power, but I don't see them catching up with Vista's speed and efficiency, end quote. I got Mountain Vista. I said Fossil Ridge will score, but just not on the level that Vista will. I am looking forward to watching this game with Mason, getting eyes on Nick Kubat in person as well as Madreski for the first time since last season for myself here, seeing what this offense looks like in real time, and also seeing what Fossil Ridge can try and do to keep up. Moving along here, we have the future opponent for those two teams here that's in this matchup of number 7 Fairview versus number 10 Chatfield. This game is on Friday at 7 p.m. up in Boulder here, where the winner faces the winner of Vista versus Fossil Ridge. Chatty breezed by Rock Canyon and are now 8-3 on the season, but Fairview is currently undefeated with beating Arvada West on the road 35-30, outshooting Fort Collins 68-49, and pulling out a close win, a rivalry win over Fossil Ridge 29-26. Jordan Retchell for this squad has 124 touches on offense for 1,399 yards and 21 total scores through the air and ground. Meanwhile, Torrey Davis here, 559 receiving yards, 382 rushing yards, and 13 total offensive touchdowns. And sophomore quarterback, my bad, Kai Ellison here has played pretty good, going for over 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns to just 3 picks. And defensively, this is what I really am focused on here for Fairview, where Ryder Villarreal, Brock Kolstad, and Jordan Retchell make up 3 of the top 4 tacklers and have a ton of experience, including playing against Chatfield in the playoffs before. Not to mention, Bo Waldo has found a big way to contribute for this defense. And with Retchell, Davis, and Wyatt Keegan all experienced in the pass defense, they're all set to ball out in this game against a younger QB. Now, let's go ahead and move to the picks here. And it's going to be pretty dicey and back and forth here. We're going to start off with Coach V here, who has Fairview saying, quote, while they didn't match up in the playoffs, they have 2 common opponents in Arvada West and Brighton. Both teams played West close while blowing up Brighton. These teams are pretty evenly matched, but I think I'll go with Fairview because of the experience advantage they have over Chatfield. Chatfield has also lost some close games to Ralston and Denver East, end quote. Returning serve here is going to be Gino here saying, quote, consistency matters, and the Chargers are as consistent as it gets when it comes to playoff success. Fairview has plenty of talent to get it done, but they just don't have that playoff resume that this Chatfield team has, end quote. And I see what he's saying, especially this coaching squad. Gideon here is going to bounce it back the other way here for Fairview, saying, quote, both teams are relatively young squads, but Fairview has more veteran talent who has been here before. They all remember last year's loss to FFC and are determined not to repeat it. I think that Chatfield will have it next year, but this will be a fight either way, 29-28 type score, end quote. Phoenix is going to increase this gap here, taking Fairview, said, quote, been riding the train all season, and they were able to remain perfect this season with Chatfield being their first real challenge since Arvada West. The bye week will do them favors, and I see them being able to last against Chatfield, end quote. Now, me personally here, I'm going to make this as split as it can get. I'm taking Chatfield here because every time I choose against them, I get burnt, and Fairview has every reason to win this game, including a ton of their players who were starting when they lost the blackout game. But gosh dang it, Chatfield has some magic and tricks come playoff time. I think that those close losses are actually going to pay huge dividends at this point in the season, and you're going to see some of these veterans of this squad step up and help lead an improbable win on the road in upset fashion, much like they did just a few years ago. Now, we're on to the final quadrant here where we got number 5, Ralston Valley, facing number 14, Arvada West, in a battle of the NAC. This takes place at the NAC, the North Area Athletic Complex, November 16th at noon, and the winner will play Legend or Arapahoe. Arvada West slaughtered the Lambkins in round 1 en route to a 7-4 record that they currently sport here, but Ralston Valley is 9-1 with some huge accomplishments on the season and way overachieved from my original projection, with a ton of first-year starters getting it done for this squad, including the performances of outshooting Erie 48-38 to start the season, outtrenching Grandview 10-9 to start the season, squeezing by Chatfield 15-12 and Columbine 35-34 in OT, and only losing to Valor on the road 34-17. Defensively, this squad is special, headlined by Matt Gates here, 109 tackles, tied for sacks at 3 with Robert Mendez, who is second on the team in tackles. Hunter Essen Price here leads the team with 3 interceptions, just ahead of Aiden G, who also has 2 interceptions, but is second on the team in tackles, along with Mendez at 81. The TFL's leader goes to Brody Schaefer, who sits at 6, so they've gotten a ton of contributions on the defensive side of the ball, especially up front. That front 7 has been pretty stout and solid this season. Offensively, Zeke Andrew is the big story here. The junior quarterback leads in passing and rushing with over 2,600 yards and 22 total touchdowns. He's been assisted by Colton Stratman and Ethan Shirazi here, who've made noise out of the backfield this season. We'll see if Stratman is healthy and good to go and suit up following the bye, as Shirazi has been doing some heavy lifting these last few weeks of the season. But out of the receiving core, Nick Bonallo here leads the team in receptions, 71 for 651 yards, but has half the touchdowns of Levi Rios, who sits atop of the team leaderboard at 8. Now, with all the facts for Ralston Valley, let's go ahead and see who everybody has here. Starting with myself, I think this one's going to be a classic, but I love RV's success in close games this season, and I think that they can win this game in a few different ways. I'm going with Ralston Valley. Phoenix here is going to go, quote, I'm fully behind this RV team after having a season that exceeded everyone's expectations of them. Back-to-back matchups with our Nevada West after closing out the season defeating them 17-7 is bad news for the Wildcats and the best case scenario for RV coming off the bye, end quote. And I got to agree with Phoenix here. They already know it works, so if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Gideon here says, quote, I give the slight edge to Ralston Valley. Zeke Andrews handed Columbine their first loss in a year and a half, and the Stangs have been composed all season, save for other top 6 opponents. I like A West, though, and guys like Christian Nightwalker and Jackson Pyatt should give Ralston pause. It's a battle of insane offense versus insane defense, but those battles often end in the offense's favor. We shall see, end quote. Gino has Ralston Valley here saying, quote, another huge rivalry game that's going down in round 2. Ralston has proven it more this season against a lot of the same opponents that Arvada West has faced, so give me the Mustangs here. Going to be a fun one either way, though, end quote. Coach V has Ralston Valley saying the battle of the knack will go crazy. My gut tells me that this is a matchup that can definitely swing either way. I'll give the edge to Ralston, but it's not the most confident pick, end quote. I think something that you can hear through everyone's picks is despite everybody picking Ralston Valley, we are all worried about what Arvada West could possibly do here because they definitely do have the talent, I want to say, to match up with Ralston Valley. They might even have more talent here, but we'll see if the experience of Arvada West and if they're able to get over the hump. I feel like it's a mental thing for the Wildcats come playoff time, especially in the deeper rounds. So we'll see what happens here, but currently Ralston Valley favored by the rest of the pod. And finally, the last game that we're going to talk about here in this quadrant is going to take place Friday at 7 p.m. It's going to be number 6 Legend versus my alma mater, Arapahoe here. And the winner will play the victor of the Battle of the Knack between RV and A-Dub. Arapahoe is loading up at 8-3 after surviving a gasping comeback attempt by Douglas County. And meanwhile, Legend patiently awaits at 9-1. Their only loss was a 2-point loss to Columbine, but they have beat Pine Creek 24-7, Grandview at 21-14, and rolled through their league. Defensively, gotta shout out John Niedringhaus here, or Niedringhaus. Oh man, John, I'm so sorry. I'm probably butchering that to all hell, but he had himself a very good season here. 80 tackles and a team high 14 for loss, and his running mate on defense, Tatum O'Donnell, was not too far behind at 12 TFLs, and both players registering over 6 sacks here. This defense has been nothing short of magnificent this season at forcing turnovers, highlighted by 13 forced fumbles. They hit hard, they play fast, and they recover the football too. 12 recoveries here. Want to shout out Raymond Bergner here, who led the way at 3 forced fumbles, at least in that category, and also notched a recovery and an interception. Offensively, they definitely win through the ground here as they have D1 commit Jaden Lawrence, the primary playmaker for this offense, rushing for 733 yards and 10 scores to go with 226 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. He's complemented nicely by Ryken Banks, who amassed 679 yards and 8 scores on the ground. And while the receiving core does have talent here, they've kind of been held hostage by inconsistent QB play and not great coaching. But let's go ahead and talk about the projection here. We're going to start off with Coach V saying, quote, Arapahoe is not as deep as Legend, and in these playoffs that matters. Legend really should move on to the next round as they're also better rested, end quote. GCat here is going with Legend saying, quote, I love what the Titans have at the running back position, and they always seem to have great personnel on defense too. Legend is battle tested, and I trust them to beat Arapahoe to move on to the quarters, end quote. Gideon here as Legend saying, quote, the Titans simply have more options. The line is better, the running back room is better, and outside of Ralston, this is the only team to play Columbine close. Legend knows how to hang on by the skin of their teeth and take a close contest, and while Arapahoe does too, they lose by 20 every time they face a team on Legend's level. I think Legend wins this one by 2 scores, end quote. Phoenix has Legend, but says, quote, this will be a fairly even matchup, but I'm giving the edge to Legend with the bye week in their advantage, and looking at common opponents between the two teams, Legend has the better resume going in, end quote. I, unfortunately, am going to have to take the side of the podcast here, picking against my alma mater here, just on the basis of Legend's experience and their playoff against other postseason teams. Seems like they're ready to make a slightly deeper run. Arapahoe, They had a handful of returners, but they also have a ton of first-year starters on varsity, and I think that is where we're going to notice that is in this round of the playoffs. So that will do it for all of the playoff picks and predictions here by everyone here at the podcast on the 5A level. Stay tuned as we are going to talk about our Playmakers of the Week, but we talked about the rest of the classifications here. So if you jumped all the way ahead here, double back and listen to the rest of the folks. And now to wrap things up, we got Playmakers of the Week brought to you by Code Red Coaching, where the grind to greatness starts with the mind. Visit CodeRedCoaching.com to enhance your mental performance, whether you are an individual athlete, whether you are a team or a group, or even professional development. You can go ahead and reach out to my guy, Cody Rosenthal, here at rosecj.6599@gmail.com or visit CodeRedCoaching.com so that way you can become as mentally acute as these playmakers here. Now, I know I might be repeating if you listen through the 1A segment, but let's go ahead and talk about the nominees from every classification and then go ahead and announce the winners here. So, nominees on the 1A level, courtesy of Phoenix here, include Casey Midcap, 5 of 6, 128 yards, 3 touchdowns, along with 116 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in Ray's big win. Also, Cade Blunt of Meeker, 33 carries, 290 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 21 tackles. And last but not least, Jason Lewisburg of Wiggins, 18 carries, 201 yards, and 4 touchdowns. On the 2A level, Jaden Michaelis here, 82 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 tackle, and an interception in the blowout win over Montezuma Cortez. Cash Alchvager, 220 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 5 tackles, 1 pass deflection, and 2 picks and a partridge in a pear tree in Wellington's win over Delta. William Daniel of Basalt, 159 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 14 tackles in opening round win over Academy. Aiden Dodge of Strasburg, 1 pick, 154 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and a tackle in the win over Denver West. Meanwhile, on the 3A level here, Coach V has submitted Carson Wolonski of Conifer, ran for 169 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in a 28-16 win over Evergreen to secure a playoff spot. Landry Suarez here of Thompson Valley, 1 sack, 9 tackles, and 2 for loss in a 16-7 win over Pomona. Or Keegan Amos here out of Mountain View, 84 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 2 receptions, 25 yards, 1 receiving touchdown in the win over Roosevelt. On the 4A level here, Gino has submitted Will Applegate of Grand Junction, 10 of 12, 264 yards, 3 touchdowns, 6 carries, 71 yards, and 2 touchdowns, along with 4 tackles in a win over Longmont. Camden Bruns of Rampart, 14 carries, 108 yards, 2 touchdowns, 13 tackles, 2 for loss in a win over Grand Junction Central. Thatcher Matthews of Golden, 9 of 19, 92 yards, touchdown, but 201 yards and a touchdown on 18 carries for Golden in their win over Riverdale. On the 5A level here, got a couple of options here. Marquise Jamison of Cherokee Trail, 1 touchdown, 1 interception here. Also got 2 Arapaho fellas here. Brody Seek, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and 3 sacks. Or Andrew Smart, 5 catches, 118 yards, and 3 touchdowns. As well as Adrian Samala here, 291 yards, 3 touchdowns in a huge win for the Wildcats here. And then obviously, got to throw in a Nick Kubat meme here. 29 to 45, 408 yards, and 3 scores. Now, let's go ahead and read the winners of each one back, starting with my classification on the 5A level. I feel like I've been putting it off all year, but I got to go with the wide receiver out of Arapaho, who has been a major focal point for this offense, Andrew Smart, 5 catches, 118 yards, and like I said, 3 touchdowns. That was all 3 touchdowns that their quarterback threw and helped, reestablish after this game became a 1-score game here. Brody, while he forced the fumble and also recovered it, Andrew Smart is the one who ripped off the 60-yard receiving touchdown to help put this game officially out of reach and put the final nail in Douglas County's coffin and give Arapaho the confidence to finish this game on top. On the 4A level here, Gino's going to go with the very first name you heard from his segment, Will Applegate here of Grand Junction. They were hosting Longmont, and he went absolutely nuclear on offense. 10 of 12, 264 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 6 carries for 71 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's over 300 yards of total offense and 5 total touchdowns, along with 4 tackles, and their first playoff win this decade for Grand Junction here and helping them advance to the second round. For Coach V here, going to go with Keegan Amos here, the senior out of Mountain View, who had a very solid game, over 100 yards, as well as 2 touchdowns in the 32-22 win over Roosevelt. And the big part here is that this secures Mountain View their first playoff spot since 2011. You heard it right. Since 2011, it has been 13 years since Mountain View has made the postseason here. And, Keegan's play here definitely gave them a chance to win this game, which they did, and secure a playoff spot. And now they want to try and make some magic out of their run and maybe see if they can match their girls flag football team success on the 3A level. But that's Keegan Amos for 3A Playmaker of the Week. 2A Playmaker of the Week, who else could it be, honestly, after hearing them read out, other than Cash Alchvager here out of Wellington? 220 rush yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 5 tackles, 1 pass deflection, and 2 interceptions specifically in the fourth quarter here to help beat Ty Reed and the defending state champion Delta Panthers here on the road. Huge win for Wellington. Is this their first playoff win in school history? If not their first, then their second. But regardless here, still none of this historical precedent or accomplishment is even possible without Cash, and now they get to host in the second round. Moving on to 1A here. Phoenix already mentioned it, but double back, listen to his recap and predictions. But I'm going to remind y'all that he went with Cade Blunt of Meeker here. Now, he said that both ways really matter. He said that there's a chance in the playoffs that if you impact one side of the ball, that it might be enough to overcorrect not being a two-way guy, but he didn't have to worry about that this week as Cade Blunt went for 33 carries, 290 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 21 tackles, 10 of those being solo, 11 assisted, in a kind of tight win over Monte Vista at home, giving them a chance to stay alive and live to fight another day on the 1A level here in the postseason. So, just to remind everybody, our Playmakers of the Week brought to you by Code Red Coaching. Be sure to visit coderedcoaching.com or email rosecj.6599@gmail.com. That's rosecj.6599@gmail.com, where the grind to greatness starts with the mind, just like these athletes who performed on the 1A level, Cade Blunt of Meeker; on the 2A level, Cash Alchvager of Wellington; on the 3A level, Keegan Amos of Mountain View; on the 4A level, Will Applegate of Grand Junction; and on the 5A level, Andrew Smart of Arapahoe High School. And that is going to do it for this edition of the Playmakers Corner podcast. But be sure to stay tuned to our socials for updates at playoff games, as well as future recaps. And we also have award season going as well. So, plenty of reasons to follow us on social media for clips and episode covers. Be sure to visit Playmakers Corner on Instagram and also know what games we're going to try to attend, as well as seeing score updates and live highlights. We also have tons of stuff going on Twitter/X at Playmaker Corner, where we post our graphics, as well as our award polls that are going on right now. As of today, we have the 2A award polls going, and each week we will advance. So next week 3A, the week after 4A, the week after 5A. These are based on regular season performances. Go ahead and listen to those award episodes that will be out on Fridays, heading forward with the very first one this Friday, talking about the 1A level, where we have a huge committee that votes on every single category here, as well as announcing our all Playmaker teams. You can also find all this information on Facebook at Playmakers Corner. We're also on TikTok at Playmakers Corner with highlights, reels, and all the good stuff here. Now, if you want to continue listening to all of our updates here, you are obviously probably listening already via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or a variety of other sites. We also post on YouTube. Wherever you are, just make sure that you have notifications turned on in your settings if you are following or subscribed. I have been your host, Cody Stopper, for this episode, wishing you all luck heading forward in the postseason of Colorado tackle football. Peace.